The Battle for the Temple of Utu. Prologue. At the dawn of a world where gods walked among men and shadows took on flesh, the Temple of Utu in Larsa was more than a house for the gods. It was a gateway between worlds. Built of white stone brought from afar, covered with gold plates and mosaics that burned in the sun, the temple shone like a heart of order in an age when chaos lurked at every corner of the desert. There, every day, the high priest Siritu climbed the steps with even steps and his hands full of offerings, murmuring ancient prayers in a language that only heaven could fully understand. Beneath the temple's dome, Utu, god of the sun and justice, received the sacrifices of men and, in sacred silence, watched over the city. But from the depths of the sands, evil had begun to make its way. Karzab-Ashazur, the dark fusion of a robber and a 1,000-year-old curse, he had raised an army of shadows and beings torn from the world between worlds. His goal was clear: to conquer the temple, to extinguish the flame of justice, and to take over the key that connected the three worlds, that of the gods, of men, and of the dead. On a moonless night, when the stars seemed to be hiding behind clouds of ash, the shadows entered Larsa. Not through the gates, but underground, through old and forgotten tunnels. The temple shook to its foundations. The guards shouted, the bronze bells rang out the call to arms. Inside, Siritu raised the jade staff of Utu and called upon the power of his god.It. Was a battle not only of swords, but of sacred words, amulets, and ritual fires. Nikalla, the priest's daughter, of Uruk stepped into the altar, carrying the cup of living flame, flames that burned not flesh but consumed lies. The lights rose, the shadows screamed, and the walls shone as bright as day. This was no simple defense of a sanctuary. This was the first battle in a war of souls, begun beneath the dome of Utu's temple, where the sun met the darkness, and only faith, valor, and love could tip the scales. The battle for the Temple of Utu had begun. Preface. Uruk, located in southern Mesopotamia, is considered the world's first great city and a symbol of the birth of civilization. Renowned for its cultural, economic, and technological achievements, this legendary city is credited with fundamental revolutions in human history, such as the development of cuneiform writing and the emergence of monumental architecture. Uruk was not only a political center, but also a religious, economic, and artistic bastion of the ancient world. Located on the banks of the Euphrates River, in a region with extremely fertile soil, the city became an important agricultural center. Its strategic position facilitated the development of an extensive trade network, which connected Uruk with other settlements in Mesopotamia, the Persian Gulf, and even with regions in the eastern and northwestern Middle East. The advanced irrigation network allowed the inhabitants to control the flow of water from the Euphrates, thus supporting agriculture. The main crops included wheat, barley, dates, and various vegetables. Agricultural success generated food surpluses, which supported population growth and economic development. Uruk became a major trading hub, facilitating the exchange of goods such as metals, wood, semi-precious stones, and textiles. Trade was carried out both by land caravans and by boats sailing the Euphrates and Tigris rivers. The city was also renowned for its impressive buildings, which reflected both the religious power and the social organization of the community. The most emblematic structures in Uruk were the temples dedicated to the goddess Inanna, the goddess of love, fertility, and war, and the god Anu, the god of the sky. The White Temple of Anu, built on an artificial hill, and the complex dedicated to Inanna were focal points of the city, decorated with elaborate mosaics and murals. Chapter 1. The Shadow of the Sun over Uruk. At dawn on a hot day, the city of Uruk shone under the golden light of the Mesopotamian sun. Beyond the slender stone gates, covered with mosaics and sacred symbols, the streets were bustling with life. Date sellers placed their wares in woven baskets, stone cutters chiseled statues of the gods, and the sound of sacred drums echoed from the temple of Inanna, the goddess of love and war, at the edge of the sacred quarter. On a high point in the city sat the royal palace, a citadel of burnt clay and stone, surrounded by gardens with palm trees, irrigation canals, and peacocks that roamed freely. The palace walls were thick and decorated with brightly colored frescoes, depicting scenes from the epic of King Gilgamesh and ritual dances under the full moon. Inside, the coolness was maintained by the floors. The corridors were wide and covered with hand-woven rugs of wool and linen, and the scent of incense and myrrh hung discreetly in the air. On the walls, mosaics of lapis lazuli and turquoise formed mythical scenes, and statues of the goddess Inanna watched from carved niches. King 𝕭𝖙𝖔𝖗, a tall and vigorous man with long hair and gold rings and a carefully braided beard, sat on his black stone throne. His eyes were like the shadow of night, deep and patient, but in them flickered an unsettling light, a premonition of change. Wearing a purple robe embroidered with solar symbols, 𝕭𝖭𝖙𝖃 was more than a ruler. He was considered an intermediary between gods and men. Next to him sat Queen 𝕊𝖙𝖕𝖒𝖕, known for her wisdom and gentleness. Her black hair was fastened with jade needles, and her golden-yellow silk dress enveloped her body in an aura of light. She had delicate hands, with long fingers, used to touching papyri and reading the stars, and in her hands, the kingdom found its balance, between the fire of the gods and the voice of the people. The palace groaned with life. Among the servants and scribes, 2 children ran around laughing. Prince 𝕭𝖙𝖙, 10 years old, passionate about stories about the glorious battle of Gilgamesh, and Princess 𝕊𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖕, a brave 8-year-old girl who sneaked into the temples to listen to the songs of the priestesses. In a hidden room, guarded by statues of the winged lion, was the inner throne room, where the king received his most trusted advisors. The floor was made of alabaster slabs, and heavy curtains of indigo-dyed cotton hung from the ceiling. There, in solemn silence, King 𝕊𝖙𝖔𝖗 listened to the news sent from the eastern borders, where the caravans were beginning to lag. "The merchants from Elam have not arrived for 3 moon cycles," said the great counselor, the old 𝕊𝖙𝖦, bowing before the throne. "Is it wind or treachery?" asked the king, playing with a burnt clay figurine representing a sacred bird. Queen 𝕊𝖙𝖦 looked up slightly. "Or perhaps a warning from the gods." The earth began to tremble slightly near the river, and the waters receded. "The signs are clear." The king looked at the wall covered with murals, where Inanna appeared with her arms raised to the sky. "Then it is time to send a messenger. Who is brave enough to go all the way south, to the end of the river?" That same day, in the palace gardens, a sturdy young man named 𝕭𝖃, the son of a court gardener, sat on a stone bench, writing on a clay tablet. Hearing rumors of the message to be sent, 𝕭𝖃 dared to ask for an audience. Raised among poets and scribes, but secretly trained by an old reclusive warrior, the boy had a noble heart and an unfulfilled dream of proving his loyalty to 𝕭𝖃. The queen received him in a room with painted columns, where the scent of cinnamon and myrrh mingled with that of parchments. In the middle of the room, a refreshing marble basin murmured softly. 𝕊𝖙𝖙𝖦 looked at him gently. "You, son of a gardener, do you want to carry the king's word in dangerous lands?" "I want to show that 𝕭𝖃 is not only stone and gold, but also brave blood in the veins of the humble," 𝕭𝖃 replied, in a confident voice. Impressed by his courage and dignity, the king appointed him a royal envoy. He was given a simple cloak of fine wool, with the city's emblem sewn on the chest, a solar disk surrounded by waters. The next day, under the eyes of an entire court, 𝕭𝖃 left through the eastern gate, carrying a message written in cuneiform, sealed with the golden ring of 𝕊𝖙𝖙. Chapter 2. The Road Beyond the Gates. The next day's dawn brought a heavy silence to the palace of 𝕭𝖃, as if the very breath of the city had stopped for a moment, awaiting the footsteps that were about to depart. From the high tower of the Temple of Inanna, the newly risen sun reflected on the palace's gilded domes and on the ceramic mosaics that shone like fish scales in the morning light, on the stone terrace overlooking the southern gardens. Queen 𝕊𝖙𝖦 looked out over the eastern gate. Beside her stood her granddaughter, 𝕊𝑗𝑘alla, a 20-year-old girl with jade eyes and the gait of a panther. Raised in the temple and schooled by the city's wise scribes, 𝕊𝑗𝑘alla knew the languages of the neighboring cities and the stars that guided the caravans on moonless nights. Her black hair, tied in a long ponytail with linen strings and gold threads, swayed gently in the wind. The queen silently embraced her and placed in her hand a small lapis lazuli talisman, carved with the symbol of the goddess Inanna. "This path is not only one of words, but also of the heart. Carry the peace of 𝕭𝖃 and listen to the echo of other peoples." 𝕊𝑗𝑘alla wore a tunic of fine wool dyed a deep blue, tied at the waist with a red belt embroidered with copper threads. Above it was a short cloak of gazelle skin, slightly reinforced at the shoulders and decorated with simple cotton tassels. Shod with sandals with thick soles of hardened leather, she was prepared for sandy and stony terrain. 𝕭𝖃, in turn, had been equipped with a beige tunic of thick wool, over which he wore a brown leather vest, reinforced with small bronze plates on the chest and shoulders. A wide leather belt held a dagger with a bone handle at his waist. His head was covered by a short camel hair cap, which protected him from the sun, and on his shoulders he had a light linen cloak, which could be the horses of the 2 had been carefully selected from the royal stables. Alol, 𝕭𝖃's stallion, was the color of smoke. With dark eyes and a rough mane, vigorous and hardy, he was known for his patience in long caravans. 𝕊𝑗𝑘alla's horse was called 𝕊𝑃𝑒𝑡u, a white mare with gray spots and clear, almost green eyes. She was agile and accustomed to the changing terrain, trained by royal guards. Following the 2 riders came 3 supply carts, drawn by large oxen with broad horns and chestnut fur. The carts were covered with oilcloth and contained sacks of barley, wheat, dried fruits, jars of water, fabrics, and medicinal herbs. Alongside them, 20 soldiers of the royal guard closed the column. The soldiers wore short woolen tunics reddish-brown, reaching to the knees, with edges reinforced with leather. Over them, each wore a bronze chainmail vest, shining in the sun like the scales of a sacred fish. Their heads were covered with hemispherical helmets, decorated with a red feather, and their hands they held long spears with iron tips, and at their waists they had short swords in leather sheaths. Their footwear consisted of heavy traveling sandals, with double leather soles and hemp rope. Reinforcements, suitable for stony roads, on their backs, each carried a short leather knapsack, with fire tools, a lyre, and a small amulet of burnt clay, the symbol of the city of 𝕆𝖙𝖏. Before leaving, at the inner gate of the palace, the high priest of the Temple of Inanna recited a short ritual, touching each of the two messengers with a palm branch moistened with holy water from the Euphrates. Go with the goddess' blessing and return in peace and good news to the eastern gate. The thick walls of burnt brick gleamed in the morning light. Sculptures of a lion and a bull, the protectors of the city, guarded the exit, while drummers beat a slow and solemn rhythm. The people had gathered to see them go, women, children, craftsmen, scribes, merchants, with their faces uplifted and their eyes full of hope. 𝕭𝖆𝖙 and 𝕭𝖙𝖏𝖕 looked at each other for a moment. They did not know each other well, but the bond that was forming in that moment would be stronger than blood, the bond of the common road. "What is the city at the southern gate?" 𝕭𝖆𝖙 asked, in a low voice. "Larsa," 𝕭𝖙𝖏𝖕 replied. "The city of the sun, the one that watches over the granaries and underground springs. If anything happens there, all of Mesopotamia will feel the ripples." 𝕭𝖆𝖙 nodded gravely. He knew now that the road was not just east, but perhaps south as well, where the missing merchants must be found and the balance of the kingdom preserved. The columns set off, the drums beating slower and slower, until silence once again covered the city. And 𝕆𝖏 remained behind, its walls shining in the sun, its temples rising to the gods, and the hearts of those who remained beating in prayer. Chapter 3. Under the Copper Sun. The sun had risen above the horizon like a hot copper plate, casting short, hard shadows over the green fields east of 𝕆𝖏. The column moved slowly, with a calculated pace, following the route of the old trade route that connected 𝕆𝖏 to Larsa, the city with temples dedicated to the sun god Utu and with wells that reached underground waters. The road was long. 60 miles separated the two cities, a distance that, with a heavy caravan and a cautious step, would take 3 days to cover. All around, the land was flat and wide, but dotted here and there with low sand dunes, the remains of old settlements, and mounds of cracked clay. To the east, the fertile fields gave way to a gently undulating relief, with abandoned irrigation canals, and further on, the horizon became cloudy with dust. 𝕭𝖆𝖙 rode a little ahead of the chariots, his spear fastened to his saddle and his eyes constantly moving towards the horizon. Beside him, 𝕭𝖙𝖏𝖕 rode straight on her white horse, as if she had been born on Xamatu's back. The silence was broken only by the sound of horseshoes, the creak of wooden wheels, and the occasional giggle of soldiers behind. "You said Larsa had underground wells," 𝕭𝖆𝖙 said, looking ahead. "How do you know that?" 𝕭𝖙𝖏𝖕 smiled a little, not with disdain, but like a teacher who is glad that a student asks. "The clay tablets in the Temple of Enki in 𝕆𝖏 say so. An old scribe copied them after a messenger came with a gift for the high priest. Larsa is built on a layer of porous earth, where water collects. Their wells do not dry up easily, even during droughts." "Have you read the tablets?" "I copied them, translated them, and turned them over in my mind dozens of times," she said. "A city is not just walls and squares. T is what we know about it and how we keep it alive in words." 𝕭𝖆𝖙 was silent for a moment. This girl spoke of stone and water as others spoke of gods. "I didn't expect a young woman to know about soils, relief, and springs," he said honestly. "Because too many men imagine that wisdom comes with age. But 𝕆𝖏 has wise women with clear eyes and sure hands. I'm just one of them." 𝕭𝖆𝖙's smile was sincere. "Then I hope I can learn something on this road too." They continued their journey in silence, letting themselves be carried away by their thoughts, wind and dust. Towards afternoon, the sun had become a burden. The tired soldiers had begun to slow down. The guard commander ordered a halt in a low meadow, close to an old canal. The soldiers quickly set up their tents of thick canvas, resistant to wind and sand. They were placed in a semicircle, around a central fire, where the caravan cook was preparing dinner: boiled barley with dried onions, dates, and a lentil stew with small pieces of goat meat. There was a smell of dried spices, probably cumin and a little wild garlic. In a corner, 𝕭𝖙𝖏𝖕 had spread out a small rug and was writing something on a fresh clay tablet. 𝕭𝖆𝖙, instead of retreating to his tent intended for the chiefs, he sat on a log beside the soldiers, sharing a bowl of barley with 2 of them, laughing at the boys' simple jokes and asking about their families in 𝕆𝖏. "Our master does not have the arrogance of nobles," said one of the soldiers, "that is rare." "He was a shepherd's son," another murmured. "Don't forget what it means to have dust between your fingers and thirst in your chest." From the sidelines, 𝕭𝖏𝖏𝖏 watched him silently. The firelight reflected in her eyes, and the wind blew through her hair like the strings of a harp. That moment, she understood something. This man, raised in the steppes, had a clear and strong heart. He was not a scholar. But he listened. He was not a priest. But he respected silence. The evening passed quietly. The stars had come out, lighting the sky in dust of light. The fires were slowly fading, and the soldiers were sleeping in tents, 2 by 2, in a corner of the camp. Sumari and 𝕭𝖏𝖏𝖏 were sitting on their bags of provisions, sipping tea from a bronze cup. "You talked less today," she said. "I listened to you. And sometimes, that's all you have to do." She smiled. Then, in a low voice, "Thank you for eating with them. That says a lot about a man. Many leaders eat alone and live alone." "Food tastes better when shared," he answered simply. "And good soldiers fight better if they know you're one of them." In the silence that followed, only the wind could be heard passing over the tents and across the dark plain. "Tomorrow we will see the first watchtowers of Larsa," she said. "And perhaps we will find out why the roads between the cities were silent," Sumari added. They fell asleep under the same sky, the earth warm beneath their bodies and their dreams linked, not yet knowing what shadows awaited them. Chapter 4. Footprints in the Sand. Dawn had risen gray over the endless plain, with a faint breeze that cooled the skin, but which announced that the merciless sun would soon rise. The commander of the soldiers, a man with a face furrowed by years and battles, raised Sumari's tent before the light reached the top of the banner. "It's time," he said in a low voice. "The sun will drive us off the road before noon." The soldiers moved quietly, accustomed to the rhythm of the march. They gathered their thick canvas tents, tied their oxhide sandals, girded their short, brick tunics, and checked their bronze weapons, straight spears, short curved swords, and simple bows with full quivers. The carts with supplies were pulled closer, and the horses, nervous, were watered with water drawn from clay pots. Sumari and 𝕭𝖏𝖏𝖏 had already emerged from their tent. The young woman had her hair tied back in a fine linen scarf, and over her thin tunic she wore a cloak of wool dyed in indigo blue, held with a copper brooch. Her ankles were protected by soft goatskin boots, and in her hand she held a walking stick, more symbolic rather than defensive. Sumari, on the other hand, was equipped like a soldier. A short tunic with leather plates across the chest, thick sandals, and a wide belt from which hung a sword and a dagger. He had tied his hair in a simple leather bun and was constantly checking his horse. They had not walked more than 2 hours when one of the soldiers in the vanguard came galloping, raising a cloud of dust behind him. "Commander!" he shouted, dismounting from the saddle with rapid breathing. The 2 scouts turned. They found the caravan missing. They all stopped. The soldiers formed a circle, while 𝕭𝖏𝖏𝖏 and Sumari advanced towards the commander. "Where?" he asked briefly. "Less than a mile to the southeast. No one is left alive, but there are no clear signs of a fight. Only tracks and collapsed carts." The commander turned to Sumari and the royal girl. "Please stay behind. We will go and investigate and return with news." But Sumari stepped forward, a determination in her eyes that made the soldiers instinctively straighten up. "No, if there is any danger, I want to know it now. I will not be sent to the palace like a child guarded by others. I will go with you." 𝕭𝖏𝖏𝖏, without waiting for any questions, pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders. "I will not stay behind either. I am the queen's niece, and I was sent for a purpose. I will not turn my back on the truth." The commander sighed and nodded. He knew that the will of the 2 was stronger than the command. "Then we move together, but with caution. Archers to keep their eyes open. No one leaves the column." The caravan set off again, but at a slower, tense pace. The ground became increasingly broken and arid, and in the distance the dry branches of wild tamarisks could be seen, a spot of life in the middle of the desert, and then they appeared, overturned carts, loaded with torn sacks of provisions, broken pots, scattered tools of the trade, bronze, cloth, pieces of worked wood. The bodies were not visible, but the tracks of bare feet, dozens, maybe hundreds, led to the edge of a deep pit, obviously dug in haste. 𝕭𝖏𝖏𝖏 dismounted and approached a piece of glazed clay. He picked up a broken bracelet and studied it with frowning eyes. "This is not from the merchants of Uruk," she murmured. "Tea is of Elamite manufacture. Someone robbed them, but not with the haste of bandits. Tea was methodical, calculated." Sumari looked at the pits. Then he drew his sword gently. "They were not killed here, but they were taken, or at least some of them. This is a kidnapping, not a massacre." "But who?" one of the soldiers asked. "The terrain is empty, no city, no fortification, nothing." 𝕭𝖏𝖏𝖏 approached one of the carts on the side wood, traced with a fingernail or a metal tip, was a strange inscription in Akkadian: "Shadows walk through the night. Those who carry the light, let them fear." "This is not a simple band of thieves," she said. "It is something deeper, warning, message." 𝕭𝖃 inclined her head. She looked at the soldiers and their commander. "Bury what we can recover, take all the supplies and mark the place. But we will not stop here. If the shadows pass through the night, we will go by day and we will go together." "You are right," said 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕𝑑𝑘𝖊, "but we must be more vigilant. Someone is waiting for us ahead, I do not know who, but it is not a simple man." And the silence that followed, the wind brought a faint smell of smoke from the south. And so, on the second day of the journey, the expedition set off again, with heavier steps, but with more united souls. 𝕭𝖃 rode in the lead, his hand on his sword, and 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕, with eyes as sharp as an owl's, searched every trace in the sand, every hollow in the clay, every breeze. Something or someone was watching them from the shadows. Chapter 5. The Whispers of the Night. Evening descended smoothly over the reddish plain, and the shadows stretched like black fingers across the cracked earth. The caravan stopped in a low valley, sheltered by two bare hills, where the wind blew less and the sand seemed more settled. The soldiers set up camp with mechanical movements, learned from years of marching. The fires were lit slowly, the horses were tied in a circle, and the tents were being erected in silence. In the middle of the camp a great fire burned, around which sat four figures: 𝕭𝖃, 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕, the commander of the troop, and a young soldier with lively eyes and the steps of a cat. The commander was called 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕, a man of nearly 50, with sunburned skin and a deep scar that furrowed his right cheek. He spoke rarely, but when he did, his voice was like stone, heavy, hoarse, and unwavering. "Tomorrow, if the clouds hold, we will reach Larsa before noon," he said, chewing slowly on a piece of dried meat. "We will walk along the dry bank of the old canal. It is the most direct route." "But also the most exposed," replied 𝕭𝖃, turning the wood into embers. "If someone is following us, that's not where we want to be." 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕, her cloak pulled over her shoulders, watched the flames with a grave expression. "I still feel like we're being followed. No animal has approached the camp. No night sound, no owl, no jackal. Just oppressive silence." "We have guards on all 4 points," said 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕. "Each guard has a bow and a full quiver. But you're right, lady. This is not natural silence, it's the silence before a storm." The young soldier in front of them cleared his throat. "Commander, with your permission." 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕 looked at him with a raised eyebrow. "Speak, shooter." "I would like to go on a reconnaissance. I will take 𝕭𝖃 with me. He has good eyes in the dark. We will walk, without torches, for an hour to the southeast. Let's see if there are any tracks, fires, movement. Then we will return before sunrise." The commander looked at him for a long time. "You know we are not on a regular mission. If you encounter anything, do not intervene. I do not want to lose men for nothing." "I understand, sir. We just want to know what awaits us." 𝕭𝖃 agrees. "Yes, sir. He was on the edge of the Elamite border. He knows the signs. We can both go in silence. Without armor, without horses." 𝕭𝖃 intervened. "If I go, I want to know what you are looking for." "Tracks? Fires? Sounds?" Shooter answered simply. "Smell of smoke, turned stones, footsteps in the sand, traces of bare or soft-skinned feet, and strange tablets or markings." Like yesterday, 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕 looked at 𝕭𝖃, then at 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕, who nodded. "Okay, go. But you have 4 hours. If you don't return in time, I'll send men after you." Shooter stood up, pulled his hood over his head, and left without another word. Soon, 𝕭𝖃 joined him from the shadows, and they both disappeared into the night, swallowed by the darkness that danced around the fire. After silence fell again, 𝕭𝖃 reached for a steaming ceramic mug of mint and cumin tea. "They are brave, or crazy." 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕 smiled weakly. "Sometimes, it takes a little of both." Commander 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕 rested his elbows on his knees and stared into the fire. "Let's hope the darkness is not wiser than we are. Because if it is, tomorrow morning we will find out how unprepared we are." The fire crackled once, and sparks rose into the starry sky. Silence fell over the camp again, like a heavy blanket, and somewhere in the darkness, the footsteps of Shooter and 𝕭𝖃 continued on, into the unknown. Chapter 6. Shadows that Walk Before Dawn. The ground was cold beneath their feet, and the wind blew softly, hissing through the hills like a forgotten sigh. Shooter and 𝕭𝖃 advanced in silence, covered in thick, dust-stained cloaks to blend into the landscape. Each step was calculated, each stone carefully avoided, each dry leaf avoided with a skill born of years of training. Shortly after they left the camp, they left behind the sound of fires and the murmur of soldiers. The sky above them was full of stars, but the moon had only just risen, offering them only a weak, diffuse light. "What do you feel?" 𝕭𝖃𝖙 asked in a whisper. "The silence is wrong, too dense. Either something is hiding, or something is watching us," shone said, stopping and bending down to examine the ground. In the weak light, he noticed tracks. They were not of animals. They were not even of sandals like soldiers. They were wide tracks, with a split tip, like hooves, but they did not resemble those of any known animal. The tracks ran parallel to the main road and stopped abruptly near a low rock. 𝕭𝖃𝖙 approached and placed his palm on the cold stone. Then he sighed. "It is warm. Someone was here a short time ago." Shone swallowed hard and surveyed the surroundings. His gaze fell on a broken branch, caught in a bush. Slowly, he pulled it away and felt something smooth under his fingers, an oval object of burnt clay, with engraved signs. "A tablet," 𝕭𝖃𝖙 whispered. "Yes, and it's written in cuneiform from the old Akkadian dialect, but it's recent. The ink still smells. Who writes them like that anymore? Those who don't want to be understood by most or by those who come from Uruk." Shone wrapped the tablet in the inner fabric of his cloak and signaled to 𝕭𝖃𝖙 it was time to return. The wind had changed. From the south, a sour smell came, mixed with ash. Someone had lit a fire not far away. The way back was quieter and colder. When they reached the camp, the sky was beginning to take on bluish hues. 𝕭𝖙 was waiting for them in front of the tent, his arms crossed. Sumeri and Nikalla were also there, awakened by the agitated rustling of the guards. "Say," the commander said, without greeting them. Shone took out the tablet and handed it to Sumeri, who took it carefully, almost religiously. "We found tracks, not of men, not of horses. Large, open steps, perhaps made by something with hooves, but it doesn't look like anything known. 𝕭𝖃𝖙 found a warm rock. There was a fire there an hour ago, maybe less." "And the tablet?" Nikalla asked, raising an eyebrow. Sumeri was already reading. "It's a warning dot or a message left intentionally. Those who step at dawn without a blessing will awaken the old ashes. Turn back, it is signed, with an unknown symbol, a double spiral surrounded by lines. It is not Mesopotamian style, it is older." "Old? What do you mean, older?" asked 𝕭𝖃𝖙, leaning on his spear. "From before Uruk. The symbols also appear in the underground temples of Akkad. They were signs of lost cults, of those who worshipped shadows. A shiver passed through everyone present. Even 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕 seemed to be digging his feet deeper into the sand. "Shall we continue our journey?" asked 𝕭𝖃𝖙. "Yes," answered Sumeri, closing the tablet in a leather bag. Even more cautiously, Nikalla looked at them both. "You did the right thing. You saved us time, and maybe lives." 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕 motioned for them to rest, and the tents quivered again, life returning to the camp. In less than an hour, the caravan was moving. But now, everyone was walking closer to each other. Weapons were at hand. Eyes always searching, and the shadows seemed longer than the day before. Chapter 7: Fire and Sand. The sun had barely risen 3 spears into the sky when the caravan left the sheltering valley and set off south. The air was already getting hot, and the sand seemed to tremble in the distance. The horses and camels walked at a leisurely pace, and the 5 carts full of provisions creaked on their heavy wooden wheels. Sumeri rode beside Nikalla, exchanging impressions about the symbols on the tablet, while Commander 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕 kept the formation tight. The soldiers in 2 columns, 10 each, with spears, held obliquely and shields at their backs. 𝕭𝖃𝖙, careful as a panther, walked ahead with 2 scouts, but there was no need to go too far. Not a mile after they had set off, a hoarse cry cut through the air. "Camels! From the east! They are coming fast!" 𝕭𝖃𝖙 turned in his saddle and raised his arm, his eyes blazing with rage. "It's the Eastern Hawks! I recognize them by their flags, the black stars on the red. And that one in front is Karzab, their leader." In less than an instant, dozens of camels charged over the dunes, carrying men armed with curved swords and long spears. Their faces were covered with dark scarves, and their eyes shone with hatred and greed. Their cries, loud and unbridled, mingled with the sounds of hooves and the roar of the wind. "Defensive formation!" 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕 shouted. The soldiers moved quickly, drawing the carts into a tight circle and using them as a barricade. Their short bronze swords sparkled in the light, and their spears were already lowered into attack position. The first wave of attackers clashed with shields and spears, but a few managed to leap over the carts, swords raised. The blows echoed in the air, shields shattered, horses whinnied, and cries of pain could be heard in all directions. 𝕭𝖆𝖙 drew his long, double-edged dagger from its sheath, and in one motion he cut the bridle of a camel, knocking the rider to the ground. He rushed at him and, with a precise movement, immobilized him. The prisoner was young, but his eyes were dark and cunning. He struggled with all his might, but 𝕭𝖆𝖙 put the dagger to his throat. "You only live if you keep quiet," he whispered. "Oh, the north of the camp, 2 soldiers captured 2 other attackers, after they had wounded them in the legs. The prisoners were screaming in unknown languages, but they had been disarmed and bound with thick hemp ropes. Still, the losses had not been light. 4 soldiers lay in the sand, their blood staining the ground and their armor red. Nikalla dismounted and knelt beside one of them, placing her hand on his chest. He was already dead. "May the jinn be easy on them," she whispered. Karzab, the leader of the thieves, shouted from the distance, after losing almost a third of his men. "We will return. Your gold will be ours. No one escapes the hawks of the east." And, suddenly pulling his camel, he disappeared into the distance with those who remained, leaving behind dust, blood and silence broken only by the groans of the wounded. The caravan was put back in order, but the silence was heavy. Wounds and death hung in the air, and the soldiers, although victorious, kept their heads bowed. 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖑𝖊, with a broken sword at his belt, turned to the 𝕭𝖆𝖙. 3 prisoners. Maybe we will find out what they are planning. But we have lost 4 good men, and 3 more are seriously injured. Nikalla approached the 𝕭𝖆𝖙. Her eyes were clear, but strong. "You were brave. You saved lives. But they were good too. Let us not forget them." "We will not forget them," 𝕭𝖆𝖙 said. "Nor Karzab. We will search for him, or he will search for us again." Behind them, the caravan began to move again, with fewer steps, but with double determination. They knew now that their mission was more dangerous than a journey. It was a step in a game of shadows, in which not only thieves were following the caravan, but also something older, deeper, and the night would come again. Chapter 8. The Hidden Language and the Truth Unveiled. The midday heat was overwhelming, and the caravan had stopped in a small natural shelter, where sparse trees and white rocks offered a minimum of shade. The air vibrated with the silence of the desert, broken only by the sighing of animals and the clank of metal as soldiers cleaned their weapons. 𝕭𝖆𝖙 stood leaning against a boulder, his dark eyes watching the 3 prisoners who had been tied to a thick trunk. One had a face full of congealed blood, another remained silent as a statue, but the 3rd figure, dressed in a loose tunic, seemed to tremble. "It is a girl," 𝕭𝖃 said, almost whispering. She pretended to be a man. She was among those who jumped from behind. 𝕭𝖆𝖙 approached. Commander 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖑 came to his side. "I have already asked them. They were silent as stones. Not a word about the camp or the leader." "Let me try," said Nikalla, who had just dismounted. She had removed her thin veil from her head and gathered her hair into a braid. Her eyes were sharp, firm, but compassionate. She approached the prisoners, knelt before the girl and spoke, slowly, in a language rarely heard on the Sumerian plains. "𝕭𝖆𝖙𝖒𝖕𝖑𝖊. Who are you? Does your king live?" The girl started. Her gaze darkened. She had not expected someone to speak to her in the eastern dialect of the semi-nomadic tribes of the Zagros Mountains. Nikalla smiled slightly and continued, moving gracefully from one language to another, Akkadian, Gutian, and even a few Elamite expressions. The girl sighed. Then, in a low voice, she answered, more with fear than courage. "I am Siritu, from the 𝕭𝖆𝖙 tribe." Nikalla bowed her head. She had heard of this tribe, migrants, skilled in fighting and camel racing. But they were not known for bandit attacks. What was Siritu looking for among the eastern falcons? "Why did you come? Why did you attack us?" "Karzab bought us and others. He promised us gold and revenge. He said the Sumerians were coming with treasures, that they would destroy the sacred springs of the south." "And the camp? Where is it?" The girl looked at the other 2 prisoners, who were staring at her sharply, but she didn't dare interrupt. Siritu sighed again. There was sand on her face and dried blood at the corner of her lip, but her voice was clear. "In the low mountains to the east, on the edge of the arid Maru Valley. 2 days' walk for a camel, 3 for a man. There are at least 50 there, and they await further orders." Nikalla stood up and turned back to 𝕭𝖆𝖙. "She is telling the truth. She was tricked. She is young, but wise. She has been trained to lie, but something in her does not want to continue on this path." "Did she tell us where the camp is?" 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖑 asked in a cautious tone. "Yes, and the name of her tribe. They are only involved because they were bought. Maybe we can turn some of them against Karzab." 𝕭𝖆𝖙 approached the prisoner and looked her in the eye. Despite her recent past, he saw no malice. Only a mixture of shame and desire to escape. Siritu, you did well to speak up. Perhaps you will not remain a prisoner for long. The girl bowed her head, but said nothing. Her gaze fell on Nikalla, as if silently thanking him for the fact that she had been treated like a human, not prey. The sun was sinking towards the edge of the sky, and the caravan was preparing to set off again. The soldiers were reforming their formation, but the tension remained. They knew now that they had not been attacked at random. It was part of a plan. 𝕭𝖆𝖙𝖙𝖑𝖊 climbed into the saddle, next to Nikalla. You have the gift of words, he told her. Tea is more dangerous than a sword. Nikalla smiled, simply. A sword cuts once, but the word can open or destroy entire cities. And the caravan set off again, southward, towards Larsa, but even deeper into the mysteries and darkness of the desert. Chapter 9. The Closed Gates of Larsa. The sun was slowly setting over the dry plain, where the shadows of soldiers and supply wagons stretched long like spears on the golden sand. After 3 days of marching in the heat and through uncertain lands, in the distance they could see the huge towers and walls of the city of Larsa, the city of the Sun Temple and bastion of knowledge in the south. But when they approached the city gates, they were closed. A guard, armed with a long spear, stood high on the walls, one hand raised. Stop! Who comes to the gates of Larsa at sunset? Commander 𝕿𝖙𝖕𝖕𝖑𝖊 made a sign, and the caravan stopped in a cloud of dust. 𝕭𝖆𝖙𝖕𝖕𝖑𝖊 rode forward, Nikalla at his side, both of them visible in their royal robes. We are sent from Uruk, in the name of King 𝕭𝖙𝖔𝖗 and Queen 𝕵𝖙𝖕𝖒𝒻. We come with news, but also with warnings, 𝕭𝖆𝖙𝖕𝖕𝖑𝖊 said bluntly. Evidence? The guard shouted. 𝕭𝖆𝖙𝖕𝖕𝖑𝖊 held out an official parchment, sealed with the emblem of the royal house of Uruk, a burnt clay seal engraved with the image of the goddess Inanna and the sacred inscription of the queen. A young soldier from Larsa hurried down and, after checking the seal, got lost between the towers. The wait was hard. More than half an hour passed, and the soldiers looked at each other nervously. The horses hooted, and Siritu, tied to a chariot, looked at the walls with a mixture of fear and fascination. Nikalla seemed calm, but her eyes analyzed every movement on the ramparts. Finally, the thick wooden gates creaked open with a heavy creak, letting in the yellow light of torches and a troop of Larsian guards, in golden breastplates and helmets decorated with solar symbols. Their head was a tall man with a neat beard and long dark blue cloak. He looked like a high-ranking scribe, but he had an authoritative attitude. I am 𝕊𝖙𝖕𝖒𝖕𝖑𝖊, chief scribe and gatekeeper. I have received the sign of your king. You are permitted entry. You are guests of Larsa. Thank you, 𝕊𝖙𝖕𝖒𝖕𝖑𝖊. We have much to say and offer, Nikalla said. Tomorrow. Rest tonight. Your people will be accommodated in the guest village, near the large market. Horses and supplies will be taken to the southern inn. The caravan set off again, but this time through the gates of Larsa. The city was a scent of incense, stone dust and licorice smoke. The streets were paved with smooth tiles, and the walls of the houses seemed high and solid, decorated with colorful ceramic tiles. Above them all, in the distance, rose the ziggurat of the sun, the temple dedicated to Utu, the god of light. Nikalla looked around, fascinated. The buildings had carved wooden balconies, and here and there were fountains where women dressed in flowing robes washed bronze vessels. As the convoy moved forward, the locals emerged from their homes and watched the caravan, the soldiers, and the prisoners with interest. A small child waved to 𝕭𝖆𝖙𝖕𝖕𝖑𝖊, and he smiled at him. When they finally reached the guest quarters, the area was already lit with large torches. The soldiers from Larsa helped them set up. Tents had been pitched in a guarded courtyard, and Nikalla, 𝕭𝖆𝖙𝖕𝖕𝖑𝖊, and 𝕿𝖙𝖕𝖕𝖕𝖑𝖊 were led to a guest house, a simple but clean building with low mattresses, embroidered pillows, and jars of scented water. Evening fell quietly. After a warm dinner of lentils, mutton, and dates with honey, 𝕭𝖆𝖙𝖕𝖕𝖑𝖊 went out into the courtyard and sat down on a stone bench. Nikalla sat down next to him, wrapped in a thin woolen cloak. You were impressive today. Without you, we might not have entered the city. Sometimes it's not force that opens the gates, it's trust, she said with a brief smile. Tomorrow we must convince the leadership of Larsa to collaborate. Let's tell them about Karzab and the danger that comes from the wastelands. And about Siritu, Nikalla completed. Then, more quietly, did you see how the people looked at us? The world is restless. I know something is coming. Yes. Tonight is just the lull before the storm. And in that silence, far from the city walls, in the desert mist, Karzab was already planning his next move. Chapter 10. In the Hall of 5 Pillars. The sun had barely risen over the rooftops of Larsa when a messenger from the palace summoned 𝕭𝖆𝖙𝖕𝖕𝖑𝖊, Nikalla, and Commander 𝕿𝖙𝖕𝖕𝖕𝖑𝖊 to their long-awaited meeting with the city's leaders. The streets were still quiet, and merchants were gradually opening their shops. Sacred chants could be heard from the temple towers, and small bells tinkled with every breath of wind. the road to the Hall of 5 Pillars. The decision-making heart of the city was paved with yellow stone slabs, and the walls were painted with scenes of harvests, offerings to the god Utu, and ancient sages holding clay tablets in their hands. Once there, the three were led by 2 officials to a vast room, where 5 huge alabaster columns supported the vaulted ceiling, decorated with solar paintings. On a high platform sat the 4 rulers of the city, and in their midst, slightly withdrawn but clearly the most powerful, was Governor 𝕵𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖑𝖊, an elderly man with dark skin and clear eyes, dressed in a white robe with gold thread in his right hand. He held a short cedar scepter, the sign of authority. Next to him were Siritu, the high priest of the Temple of Utu; 𝕭𝖙𝖕𝖕𝖕𝖕, the leader of the merchants and representative of the eastern quarter; 𝕭𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖕𝖕, an imposing woman, the leader of the city guard; 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖕, the scribe judge, the one who spoke and wrote down every word. The governor spoke first, his voice calm but strong. "Welcome to Larsa, envoys of Uruk. We owe you hospitality, but we also want answers. Why does an armed caravan come, with prisoners and rumors of attacks, on the eve of the fire festival?" Sumri stepped forward. He wore the official robe of a royal messenger and a ring with the signet of 𝕭𝖙𝖔𝖗𝖞. "We come with respect and warning. In a way, we were attacked by an organized gang known as the Hawks of the East, led by a man named Karzab. They had precise information about our route. They killed 4 of our men. We captured 3 of them. One revealed to us that they have a camp in the arid Mara Valley. This is no simple band of robbers. They are organized, trained, and well-informed." Siritu, the high priest, frowned. "Karzab, I have heard this name in prayers. He was once a scribe in Gursu. Exiled for blasphemy, T was said that he brought false dreams to people and spoke of a black light." Nikalla stepped forward and spoke gracefully. "Among the prisoners is a girl, Siritu, who betrayed Karzab's camp. She told us that their leader wants to destabilize the cities of the south, to cause chaos between temples and governors. He gathers forgotten tribes, nomads, and deserting soldiers. If we do not unite, it will be too late." 𝕭𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖕, the leader of the city guard, slammed her hand on the bronze table in front of her. "And what do you ask of Larsa? An alliance? Troops? Supplies?" 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖕 stepped alongside Nikalla. "We ask for a temporary coalition. Let us set out together on a reconnaissance mission into the arid Mara Valley. Let us capture Karzab and destroy his base. If he succeeds in spreading fear among the cities, it will be the end of the balance in the south." 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕 was already writing each word on the tablet, with quick and precise movements. Governor 𝕵𝖊𝖒𝖕 closed his eyes for a moment. Silence fell in the great hall. Then he spoke. "Those who come with wisdom must be listened to, and those who come with blood on their hands must be judged. I will send 3 of our captains to analyze the camp. If what you say is true, Larsa will answer." Nikalla bowed her head in gratitude. "Thank you, master. May the sun illuminate the steps of each of us." The governor smiled slightly. "The sun illuminates, but it also burns. Just as this alliance could burn, if it is not built on truth." And with these words, the meeting ended. Sumri, Nikalla, and 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖕 had been heard. But the War of the Shadows was only beginning. Chapter 11. The Shadow and the Road. The Hall of 5 Pillars was plunged into semi-darkness as the Council of Larsa gathered again, this time for a decision that could change the balance of entire southern Mesopotamia. In the middle of the hall, guarded by 2 soldiers, stood Siritu, the young woman captured from the ranks of the Eastern Falcons. Her green eyes, wide and restless, looked now at Nikalla, now at Sumri. Her hair was tied in a simple braid, and her clothes, clean but modest, were provided by the palace servants. In her hands trembled a vessel of water that she held respectfully, as if an offering to fate. Governor 𝕵𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖕 rose from his carved wooden chair and spoke clearly. "Siritu, you have chosen to betray the camp of Karzab, the leader of the Eastern Falcons. If you lie, your life will end in the dungeons beneath the city. If you tell the truth, you have a chance to be forgiven and even become an ally of the cities. Now, in front of the witnesses and the scribe, do you undertake to lead a mission to the camp of those who raised you?" Siritu straightened his back. He spoke in a clear voice, but barely restrained by fear. "Yes, I swear by the goddess Ishtar and the hot desert earth, I will take you to the camp. But you will not go with many. If they sense us in time, they will hide or kill us mercilessly." Sumri intervened. "We will go only with the chosen ones, me, Nikalla, 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖕𝖕, and you. 4 is all we can risk. We will leave the rest waiting, and if we do not return in 2 days, an assault force will be launched." That afternoon, the 4 prepared to leave. Nikalla wore a long sand-colored tunic of coarse linen, fastened with a leather belt. Over it, a hooded cloak protected her from the desert wind. Sumri, as usual, wore a light coat of fine mail over a thin woolen shirt, and at his waist he carried a short sword and a curved dagger. 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖑𝖊 was clad in steel and leather, and his helmet had an inscription on the side with the symbol of the city of Uruk. Siritu, in the clothes Nikalla had provided, seemed an ordinary traveler. But in her eyes remained that spark of knowledge of the danger that lay ahead. Each had his own horse, the red stallion, and Nikalla's horse was called 𝕊𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖑𝖊, a white mare with gray spots and clear, almost green eyes. Swift, black-haired animals bred for arid terrain. 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖑 rode a heavy horse with light armor, and Siritu had been entrusted with a tame but resilient mare. They set off at sunset, silent and with heavy thoughts. Siritu walked ahead, his gaze fixed, avoiding eye contact for too long. The terrain was increasingly arid, dotted with reddish rocks, dusty plateaus and sparse bushes of grass. On the horizon was a narrow valley flanked by two bare hills, 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖑𝖊. As the girl called it, and the evening they lit a small fire, hidden from view. They sat close to each other, under an improvised shelter between two huge boulders. "How far is the camp?" asked 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖕𝖑. "Tomorrow evening we will arrive nearby," replied Siritu. "It is hidden among the rocks, in the lowest part of the valley. From there, I send spies in all directions. Karzab has people in Larsa, in Ur, and maybe even in Uruk." Nikalla frowned. "What does he really want? Just looting?" "No," replied Siritu, whispering. "He wants to destroy the order of the cities. Says the gods have given him a mission, to burn the temples, to break the chain between the rulers and the people. He says he is the one born of the ash wind." Sumri was left thinking. "Then we are not fighting just a gang, but a cult. One born of chaos." The fire crackled softly. Above, the stars burned coldly. "If we get close to the camp," said 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖑𝖊, "what sign will prove that we are not enemies?" Siritu took from his cloak a piece of red cloth, with an embroidered sign, an open circle with a broken line in the middle. "This is the symbol of the shadow of Karzab. If I see it, I will not shoot immediately. But I cannot guarantee anything. Many believe me a traitor and will not forgive me." Nikalla reached out and touched her arm lightly. "If you do not betray us, you are free." Siritu looked at her for the first time. Truly, shadow of gratitude appeared in her eyes. "We will go to the end," she said. Sumri pulled the cloak over her shoulders and said, looking up at the sky, "Tomorrow we will see the truth. Each step brings us closer not only to Karzab, but to who we truly are." And so, under the stars above the desert, the four waited for dawn. Silent, determined. Chapter 12. In the Heart of Shadow. On the second evening, as the wind came down coldly from the bare hills, the four of them stopped on a low hill, covered with fine gravel and sparse bushes. From there, the hidden valley of 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖑𝖊 could be clearly seen, a deserted and silent place, but in its heart burned the moving light of campfires. Under the moon, the shadows of large goatskin tents could be seen, spread out in an irregular circle, hidden between the rocks. Armed men patrolled the edges. The smell of smoke and burning flesh hung in the air, and in the center of the circle, a black tent with golden edges dominated the entire camp, Karzab's tent. "There he is," whispered Siritu, pointing to the large tent. "He sleeps with minimal security, because he believes himself invincible. Tonight he is alone, confident that no one would dare to approach." "If we approach now, there will be eyes everywhere," 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖑𝖊 said, peering through the short bronze scope. "We wait for the fires to die down, when the guards are tired." Nikalla checked the dagger hidden in the sleeve of his tunic. Sumri, calmly, prepared his short sword and a thick leather rope. The plan was clear. Siritu would sneak in first, enter the tent as if he had returned to Karzab for good. If he managed to put him to sleep or keep him quiet, the other three would have a few moments to enter quietly, strike him, and take him prisoner. If the plan failed, the entire camp could turn on them. The silence of the night was broken only by the occasional whistle of the wind among the stones. When the sky was already completely dark and only a few torches still illuminated the camp, Siritu pulled up his hood and she set off alone among the shadows. She walked like a ghost, with measured steps, without hesitation. No guard stopped her. They recognized her, although with surprise. Maybe they thought she had returned. Maybe they thought it was a vision. No one had the courage to ask her anything. Arriving at the tent, she pushed aside the heavy canvas and entered. Karzab was fast asleep on a thick mattress, covered with a black wool blanket. At the end of the bed lay his sword and an empty bowl of wine. His face was stern, bearded, but tired, dreaming, perhaps, of empires in flames. Siritu paused for a moment. Her eyes were trembling. She had been part of his dream. She had been one of the shadow children. But now she knew. That dream was a disease. She raised her hand slightly and, with a short movement, pulled a string tied to her wrist. That was the signal. In a few moments, the canvas of the tent moved slightly, and Nikalla, Sumri, and 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖑𝖊 stepped inside like shadows. "Now," 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖑𝖑 whispered. 𝕭𝖆𝖏 went first. With a short, hard wooden stick, he gave Karzab a quick blow to the temple. 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖑 held his body down, so that he would not writhe. Karzab groaned, but he did not have time to cry out. 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕 bound his mouth and hands with a rope brought from Larsa. The whole thing took less than a minute. "Cover him!" They wrapped him in a thick blanket, with the hood pulled over his face. They mounted 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖑's horse, and Siritu took the reins. Each of them pulled his cloak up to his eyes, and in the silence of the night, they set off at a leisurely pace, as if they were on patrol. But they had not gone 100 paces when a guard spotted something strange. A shout was heard. "Wait! Who is there?" Sumri drew his sword and threw it in the direction of the voice. Short scream, then silence. But it was too late. The alarms had been raised. 3, 4, then 8 men came out with torches and spears. "Run!" 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖑 shouted, and his horse took off like lightning, with Karzab tied to it. 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕 drew a bow and felled a pursuer. Siritu cut a stretched rope with his dagger, knocking a burning torch over a tent and creating confusion as the horse sped. Sumri managed to throw a bag of ashes and sand into the air, an old trick of blinding. The pursuers were temporarily blinded, and in those few precious moments, the group escaped from between the tents and soared into the valley. They fled with the wind at their backs and the shadow warriors behind. But 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖑's horse was the fastest. Karzab, unconscious and tied, could not move. The others scattered to confuse the pursuers, but they met again an hour later, at the stable site, a dry stream pit at the edge of a plateau. "He's alive," 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕 said, looking at the prisoner. He was breathing hard, but he was alive. "We have one day to get him back," 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖑 said, "before the thieves gather." "And if he escapes?" Siritu asked, trembling. Sumri leaned toward her. "He won't. Not with you by our side." With the ruddy dawn behind them and a prisoner shrouded in shadows, the 4 galloped toward Larsa, carrying with them not just a man, but the key to a budding uprising. Chapter 13. The Truth Brought in Chains. Dawn was slowly breaking over the towers of Larsa, and the long shadows of the walls stretched across the dusty roads. The great gates to the north were already open when the 4 horsemen appeared on the horizon, accompanied by a 5th horseman, bound tightly and covered with a thick cloak. Karzab, brought alive from the heart of the shadows. The guards at the gate froze as they recognized the Sumri and 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕. One of them ran to Mardakahi, the governor of the city, who was already waiting for them. In the Hall of 5 Pillars, along with members of the council and the royal scribe and the palace courtyard, Karzab was dismounted and dragged under the silent gaze of the councillors and priests. He was conscious now, but his eyes, deep and red, looked with contempt at everything around him. "Traitors of the gods, slaves of your weak walls," he muttered between his teeth. When Sumri pushed him to his knees in the middle of the hall, Mardakahi advanced, accompanied by 2 scribes, and raised the staff of judgment, carved with a snake's head at the top. "Karzab, you have been brought alive to the citadel to answer before the council. You have waged secret war against cities, burned caravans, poisoned springs, and incited rebellion. Oh, you have anything to say?" Karzab looked up. He was smiling. A cold, stony smile. "You call war what I call liberation. The true gods do not live in your temples. They rise from the ashes and demand fire. I only follow their command." Murmur ran through the hall. Some councillors frowned, others made the sacred sign on their chests. "Have you received gold from our enemies in the east?" 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕 asked. "Gold is just a stepping stone to a dream. Whoever sent me recognized my power. But he didn't pay me. I am not sold. I am the herald of your doom." Siritu, in a corner, trembled. His voice pierced her bones, bringing back dark memories. "How many people are in your camp?" 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖑 asked. "How many are about to set off for Larsa?" Karzab laughed. "There is no longer just one camp. It is a chained river underground. Thousands, maybe tens of thousands. And they are not coming just to Larsa. They are coming to all your fat and flabby cities." Sumri leaned towards him. "And who is the shadow above? Who do you worship?" Karzab was silent for a moment. Then, he spoke a single name. Ashazur. A shiver ran through the hall. The name was unknown in the temples, but it was present in ancient writings, fragments of clay tablets found in the ruins of Adab. Ashazur, a cursed god, outlawed hundreds of years ago, associated with fire, chaos, and the overturning of the chain of the world. Mardakahi rapped his staff on the floor 3 times. "Enough. He will be locked in the southern tower, under double guard. He will be examined by the wise men of the temples and guarded day and night. And in 7 days, the council will meet to decide his fate." Karzab was dragged outside, and already in the hall's anxious voices began to gather. The word Ashazur was passed from mouth to mouth. That evening, 𝕭𝖆𝖙𝖕𝖑𝖊, 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖙𝖑𝖑, and Siritu were invited to a small meeting with Mardukāhi and the palace scribe. "You have saved the city," said the governor. "But you have also brought a shadow deeper than any known war. If he speaks the truth, then the cities will fall one by one, without us knowing where the blow comes from." 𝕭𝖆𝖙 took a sip from his water bowl and said, "It is time to stop looking outside. It is time to look within. Who spoke to Karzab? Who helped him? Who called him?" Nikalla added, "We need a network of messengers, people who can walk among the shadows and bring news. Siritu led us to him. But she is not alone." Mardukāhi stood and nodded. "You will lead this new initiative. Siritu, if you choose, you can stay here, under my protection, or you can leave. But if you choose to stay, you become a citizen of Larsa." Siritu, silent, her hands clasped in her lap, looked at Nikalla, then at 𝕭𝖆𝖙. "I will stay, but not as a citizen, but as a witness, and as a messenger among the shadows." That evening was the beginning of a new page in the history of Larsa. Karzab was captured, but the war was just beginning. Chapter 14. The Soil in the Dark and the Name That Never Dies. Night had fallen upon Larsa with an unnatural weight. The wind carried with it a smell of ash, wet clay, and burnt wood, as if the gods had momentarily left the realm of men. The Temple of Utu, the sun god, stood brightly lit by torches, but that night even the flames dared not dance too loudly. In a low, vaulted room hidden deep within the temple, Siritu, the high priest, kneaded his hands on an alabaster table. Beside him stood 𝕭𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖑𝖊, the commander of the city guard, a broad-shouldered woman with iron eyes, and a voice that could quell an uprising with a single word. "𝕭𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖑," he said, his voice hoarse, "you are in charge of the dungeons beneath the cities. That robber still down there? The one who was brought in chains 7 months ago?" "Yes, Most High," answered 𝕭𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖑, "he is alive. Fed on water and scraps of bread, he curses in his sleep and spits blood, but he does not die. At the trial he said he saw him. Ashazur." 𝕭𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖑 rested her hand on the hilt of her sword. "All those who have lost their minds talk about shadows. But if he is telling the truth, then perhaps Larsa is already betrayed." Siritu nodded and rose heavily from her chair. "𝕭𝖊𝖒𝖑, you are a woman of steel, but no sword can cut the shadows. If that cursed one has returned, then even the bronze gates will not save us." Shortly after midnight, the southern gate was shaken by 3 sharp knocks. Small patrol was on guard, but when they opened, there was neither man nor cart outside. Only a man dressed in a gray cloak. His face covered by a mask of burnt wood, he did not seem to breathe, he did not make a sound. But in his right hand he held a seal point. One of the soldiers, frightened, ran towards the palace. When 𝕭𝖆𝖙 and Nikalla were urgently called, the mysterious messenger had already been escorted to the council hall, where Mardukāhi, the governor, was waiting for him surrounded by priests and scribes. "Who are you, and from what depth do you come?" Mardukāhi asked. The stranger dropped his mask. Beneath it, his skin was glued to his bones, with deep-set eyes the color of pitch. He was not alive, but he was not dead either. Something else felt inside that body. Something old, something broken. "I am the voice of Ashazur, the hidden in time," he answered in a throaty voice, like crushed stone. He does not ask, he commands. A tremor ran through the room. Nikalla took a step forward. "Ashazur is a myth, a name used to frighten children." "No," said the messenger, "he was the high priest of the city of Kesh. Until he dared to bring life to dead bodies, he was burned. His body was wrapped in sheets of lead and buried under the sand. But a part of him never died, and the curse woke him when your temples began to fall silent." 𝕭𝖆𝖙 motioned for the soldiers to approach. "And what do you want?" "He demands the release of Karzab.By, the third rising of Utu. Otherwise, Larsa will fall." "What proof do we have that you speak on his behalf?" Mardukāhi asked. The soul pulled aside his cloak and took from a small bag an object wrapped in old leather. He slowly opened it, and everyone in the hall froze. It was a clay tablet, covered with an unknown cuneiform script, blood-red in color. When Siritu approached, he was visibly trembling. This is the ancient script of Kesh. No one knows how to use it anymore. Only 3 symbols were written on the tablet. The last was an image of a sun covered by a circle of darkness. The eclipse of souls, as it had been called in the old legends. The soul fell silent. Then he turned without another word and went out, disappearing into the night, as silently as he had come. Dawn, 𝕭𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖑 descended into the dungeons of the deep. There, in the darkness and mold, the robber Siritu had spoken of stood bound, dirty, with a scruffy beard and an old wound on his ankle. But when he saw her, he smiled. "He came, didn't he?" I knew he would come. Who? 𝕭𝖃𝖔. Don't name him. He was with me in my dream, looked at me, and showed me burning cities. People were hanging from the towers. Then he said to me, "It's almost time." 𝕭𝖃 approached. What did he look like? He has no face, just a black veil, but the voice is like a knife in flesh, and where he treads, the earth no longer sprouts. 𝕭𝖃 left without a word, with only one conclusion in mind. This threat was not a human one. That day, the council met in haste. 𝕭𝖃𝖒, and Mardakahi decided. Karzab will not be released. But we must prepare. Send messengers to Uruk and Eridu, Siritu said. Ask for help. This is not a war of Larsa alone. T is the beginning of a different end. And Nikalla, with his hand on the dagger, said, If 𝕭𝖃 lives, then he will learn what it means to face men who fear neither gods nor shadows. Chapter 15. In the Shadow's Footsteps. In the cold dungeons beneath the Temple of Utu, torchlight flickered faintly on the damp walls, and the smell of mold, dried blood, and old stone seemed to rise from the very bones of the earth. The robber, bound hand and foot, could barely blink, but his eyes were alive. That night, after 𝕭𝖃's messenger had departed, 𝕭𝖃 descended into the dungeon again, accompanied by Nikalla and 𝕭𝖃. Tell me, 𝕭𝖃 said, leaning one knee on the cold stone, where is this shadow's nest? I will not say anything until you give me warm food, a blanket, and a room with light, he muttered. 3 months I have slept in cold water, 3 months I have been bitten by rats, and I have talked to ghosts. Now I want a little life. 𝕭𝖃, calmly, he made a discreet sign. That night, the robber was brought a pot of stew, 2 pieces of baked bread, a thick blanket, and a bed of straw under heavy guard in a side room of the temple. The next day, when the sunrise of Utu caressed the tops of the towers of Larsa, he was brought before the council again, with eyes still shadowed by fatigue, but with a sinister certainty in his voice. He said, 8 miles west of Larsa, beyond the salt hills, lies an old stone quarry, abandoned for decades. Beneath it are galleries, shafts, and tunnels, places that men have forgotten. That's where I saw him. That's where 𝕭𝖃's abode is. Without wasting time, that morning, 5 horsemen were chosen for a secret mission. Nikalla, 𝕭𝖃, 𝕭𝖃, Siritu, a cartographer and expert on the region, and 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕, the best tracker in the southern guard. They set off on fast horses, wrapped in short cloaks, with gray-colored coats and leather boots reinforced with bronze plates. Nikalla wore a simple but functional garment, with a double belt for knives and a curved dagger hidden under the sleeve. 𝕭𝖃 had a black leather breastplate and a long Sumerian sword, carved with the seal of the guard. 𝕭𝖃 went without a breastplate, but with a quiver full of scrolls, seals, and a copper short sword. Siritu, thin and dry, carried his maps and compass in an old bag, while 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕 had an obsidian spear and a fish-scale headdress, traditional for night hunters. They crossed the marshy fields around Larsa, then they climbed gently to the salt hills, a place forgotten by the gods, where the cracked earth was white and gray, and the wind hissed like an ancient breath. Nothing grows here, said Siritu. The earth is poisoned. This place has been cursed long ago. After an hour of silent walking, they reached the edge of a wide chasm, an abandoned quarry. The edges were jagged, and at the bottom of the chasm were dark entrances, the old mine shafts, now silent and covered with cobwebs and dry moss. 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕 descended first and approached one of the entrances, knelt, placed his palm on the ground, and closed his eyes. People have passed through here. Many. Less than a day ago. So our spy wasn't lying, 𝕭𝖃 murmured. Nikalla, her eyes dark with doubt, turned to 𝕭𝖃. What do we do now? Go straight in? No, we wait for the night. We catch them when they come out or when they turn on the lights inside, if 𝕭𝖃 is there. I want to know how he breathes, how he walks, and how he bleeds. They retreated to a safe distance, hiding in a rocky depression. With their torches extinguished, their ears strained in the darkness, they waited. The wind was silent now, and the moon, bloody and sick, was slowly climbing over the hills. Then, from one of the mine shafts, a shadow moved. A man. A being. Or another part of the curse. At that moment, everyone felt that they had crossed the threshold of their world. That in those galleries, not only bodies are lost, but also memories. And 𝕭𝖃, if he was really there, was not waiting, he was waking up. Chapter 16. Eyes that don't see. Nikalla and 𝕭𝖃 descended first, their torches casting long shadows on the damp walls of the gallery. Behind them, 𝕭𝖃, Siritu, and 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕 walked silently, each with a hand clutching his weapon. The smell was heavy, sulfur, rotting flesh, and old wax, and the air grew colder with each step. The tunnel seemed to have formed naturally, but the marks of carving were visible. ancient lines, carved into the stone. Some meaningless, others clearly belonging to a lost language. On one wall, Siritu extinguished his torch and murmured. Here are symbols of necromancy, a circle with 5 arms, and a broken amulet in the center. It's not Sumerian, it's older. Keshian, whispered Sumeri. Ashazur was a priest in Kesh. Even the priests of the shadows forbade them to use such symbols. They descended in silence into a large hall, carved deep into the stone. The ceiling was high and vaulted, and in the middle stood an altar of black stone, surrounded by animal skulls and human bones. Around the altar, on the floor, a double circle had been drawn, with strange signs of ash and dried blood. Nikalla made her son's sign of Utu. Even she, who did not believe in fear, felt that the ground beneath her feet was not that of men. Then, from the darkness of a side gallery, a harsh whisper came, like a breath through sand. You came late. They all turned their torches. From the shadows, a long, bandaged figure slowly walked towards them. Its movements were strange, jerky, and each step made a soft sound, like crushed flesh. Wait. Who are you? Ashera shouted, raising her sword. The figure stopped and, with a slow movement, raised her hands and began to untie the bandages. As they came off, they fell to the floor like dried snake skins. There was no face under them. There was no skin. It was a creature with the head of a jackal, but with a human body, muscular and gray, tense like a warrior's. Eyes. There were none. Just 2 black, empty recesses, from which came no light, but a frozen attraction, like a call from a bottomless pit. I am 𝕵𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖑𝖊, guardian of the threshold between the living and the called, servant of the shadow that rises. Are you a creature of Ashazur? Nikalla asked, aiming her curved knife at him. The creature smiled. Sharp, jagged teeth protruded from an animal jaw, like stones eaten by the wind. I am not his, I am a part of him. A fragment broken, hidden, and resurrected. It does not come as a man, it comes as a death wish. Like the end that walks on 2 legs, I have dreamed of you. I have seen your blood flow over these stones. Not today, but soon. Karzab? Sumeri asked, his voice dry. He is ready. His bone has been anointed with harvest oil. His heart has been stopped and restarted. He is one of us, even though he still has living flesh. Ashera took a step forward. We will turn and burn everything. We will leave no room for shadows. 𝕵𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖕 raised a hand, and the torch's flames flickered, then fell, as if an unseen hand had smothered them. You cannot stop an unspoken curse. When Ashazur enters Larsa, the walls will close and the temples will cry fire. You, the living, will learn what it is like to forget to breathe. A shiver ran through them all. Then, without warning, 𝕵𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖕 raised both hands and let out a howl such as had never been heard in those galleries before, a howl like that of a being who no longer knows what life is but cannot die. The walls vibrated. The circle of ash ignited in an instant. Come out! Belnasir shouted, tearing them all from the spell. They fled through the galleries, flames flickering, the air burning in their chests. Behind them, a long, inhuman laugh followed them. On the surface, when they emerged into the pale moonlight, Sumeri turned and said, There is not just a hiding place, T is a tomb in which something has been awakened. Nikalla put her hand to her heart. And that something is no longer asleep. Chapter 17. The Voice That Won't Be Heard. The road to Larsa was traveled in silence. None of the 5 riders could find words for what they had seen in the galleries beneath the forgotten quarry. Nikalla rode in the lead, her jaw set and her hand clenched on the reins. Behind her, Sumeri repeated 𝕵𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖕's words to herself, like verses from an ancient prophecy. Ashera, though her hand was on her blackened sword, her eyes were clouded, as if the war she had known no longer resembled what was coming. As they passed the gates of Larsa, the noon bells were ringing for the gathering of the market. The city was alive, but no one knew what was coming. They entered the council palace in a hurry. Siritu, the high priest of the Temple of Utu, greeted them on the marble steps, accompanied by 2 others council members 𝕵𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖕, the old scribe, and 𝕭𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖕, the young general of the northern guard. What happened? Why did you return early? Siritu asked, but when he looked at their faces, he fell silent, and the great council hall, Nikalla spoke first. Ashazur lives, or what once was Ashazur has been awakened. He is not just a man, he is a curse in the form of a body. Sumeri added. The galleries beneath the salt hills are full of ritual traces, an altar, a circle of blood, and a creature, called 𝕵𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖕 who made it clear that Ashazur was to enter Larsa soon. You have been drugged, hallucinated, said 𝕵𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖕, raising an eyebrow. These places are full of mold and poisonous breaths. What you have seen are the shadows of your mind, not the deeds of the world. Ashera glared at him. Shadows leave no traces of fresh blood on the altar. Shadows do not speak forgotten languages and do not light circles of ash. Shadows do not speak the name of Larsa. Siritu seemed troubled, rose and walked to the hall window, looking out at the towers of the Temple of Utu. There is an old legend, from the time of the Clay dynasty. It is said that in an underground city beyond the Salt Hills, a faction of shadow priests wanted to bring back a part of the fallen shadow. They reanimated an old body, created a bridge between the world beyond and our world. That body was carried from city to city, and wherever it reached, the temple would collapse, and the priests would commit suicide. The name of that body was 𝕭𝖃𝖔𝖏. A shiver ran through the council.
And now?
Siritu asked. What do we do? Nikalla spoke the heavy words. Close the gates, strengthen the walls, call the guard from the east and remove the heavy armor from the warehouses. Prepare reserves of water and food.
And
give the order that no one should enter Larsa for 3 days. Shall we put the city under siege? 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖑𝖊 burst out. We will create panic. Trade will be affected. And what if it is a mistake? Siritu turned her head suddenly. What if it is not? At that moment, a dull thud was heard from the southern gates of the city. A soldier rushed into the council chamber, covered in dust and blood. He has returned. He shouted. Karzab has escaped. He was freed by a faceless shadow that appeared in the dungeon and burned the bars without fire. The guards are dead. The walls have been penetrated by something that used no hands. Ashera drew her sword. Sumari rose from her chair, her eyes fixed to the south. Nikalla murmured, It begins. Siritu raised her hands to all present. You, who have witnessed, are from today the circle of watch. 𝕭𝖃𝖔𝖏 is coming, and he is not coming for a man, he is coming for a city. Chapter 18. Eyes that see through the dark. As the bronze bars of the dungeon melted without flame, Karzab felt no fear, he felt nothing. Only a strange warmth in his bones, as if something old, long forgotten, had found its place within him again. From the darkness, a figure with eyes like embers spoke to him voicelessly. I chose you not because you are strong, but because you hungered for freedom in your deepest dreams. 𝕭𝖃𝖔𝖏 had no body like a man, he was a cloak of shadows, a voice without a mouth, a will with a foreign face. But Karzab understood him now, as if the creature's language were written in his marrow, knew he was no longer human. Not entirely. The shadow had seeped into his skin, into his blood, into his gaze. His body was the same, but his mind was not. It was as if someone else was whispering to him, but in his own voice. He felt his memories, but also something new, visions of buried places, fallen temples, and a crown of burnt bones, worn by a figure that burned without smoke. When they emerged from the dungeon, the fallen guards seemed like mere broken branches. It no longer mattered. The shadow followed through the hidden tunnel in Larsa's southern walls, on the surface. The night was thick, and the sky was starless. Karzab could feel the city throbbing, like an old wound beneath his feet. The smell of baked bread, of incense oil, of the dust of the market, all irritated him. Now, he wanted smoke, blood, and silence. What should I do? He asked, his voice now sounding like two overlapping voices. Don't ask, look, and Karzab saw it. He saw the walls that had hidden cracks. The storerooms with supplies, but also the warehouses filled with the fear of soldiers. He saw the golden dream of Larsa, shining like a city of salt before a black sea. And in that dream, 𝕭𝖃𝖔𝖏 blew, and the dream melted. The shadow extended his hand, or what seemed like a hand. Karzab touched it, and in that moment, an invisible line opened on his forehead. He felt the ground beneath him recognize him. How the dogs hidden under the tables began to howl, how the fire in the torches trembled at his approach. He was no longer Karzab, the robber, he was Karzab, the voice of the fisher, the first living servant of 𝕭𝖃𝖔𝖏. What comes next? He asked. The city will fall from within, we will only wait. Wait. Trust feared, it does what weapons cannot. Karzab crept into the city, through deserted alleys, through side streets, unseen. Wherever he passed, the light faded. Wherever he looked, dreams darkened. He reached the ancient arches of the Temple of Utu, where the high priest Siritu slept in his chamber of oils and tablets. He did not enter, merely pressed his palm to the cold stone, and the forgotten words of 𝕭𝖃𝖔𝖏 etched themselves into the sacred wall. Then he returned to the ruin of an old house, covered with ivy. There, in the deathly silence, sat 𝕭𝖃𝖔𝖏. Will you conquer the city in silence? We don't conquer, we let go. People are just fragile walls. Touch them, and they break. Karzab put his hand to his chest. He could feel his heart no longer beating like it used to. It was slow, deep, like a drum underground, as if every beat was a call to something. older than the stones. And Nikalla. She will see the one I once was. She will recognize her, and love her, and lose her. Summary. She was born of blood. She will die in truth. Karzab closed his eyes. And, for a moment, he opened the ones he didn't have, in another world and the ruined air between worlds, where 𝕭𝖃𝖃 built his kingdom not of walls, but of time, fear, and oblivion. Chapter 19, of Ashes and Shadows. Deep in the salt hills, where the earth groans and the air is heavy as molten lead, Karzab knelt in the center of a circle carved in stone. Thin strands of black smoke rose from his chest, like living veins. Above him, 𝕭𝖃𝖃, or what had once been 𝕭𝖃𝖃, let his shadow drain into the body of the former robber. The fusion was an act of will, a covenant as old as primordial clay. You are no longer flesh. You are no longer blood. You are a cross of curse and desire. You are 𝕭𝖃𝖃 Karzab. Karzab's eyes, when they opened, were colorless. His pupils were just a deep blackness, like two gates to another world. His voice, when he spoke, had the echo of two overlapping voices. I no longer have death and no body and no time, I only have will. Beside him, emerging from a crack in the rock, appeared 𝕾𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖑𝖊, the jackal-headed creature, his muscular and gray body, taut as that of a warrior born of stone and fire. His skin was cracked in places, as if burned by cursed rays, and his green eyes sparkled with a ferocious intelligence, and one hand he held a long weapon, made of obsidian, carved with forbidden symbols. Your master was born from the shadows. You were only a step, Karzab. Now we are one, but I am the guardian of the gate. Karzab, or rather, 𝕭𝖃𝖃 Karzab, looked at him without fear. The gates will fall, but not yet. First, the army. Around them, the earth trembled faintly. From deep cracks, whispers began to be heard. Not from human mouths. Not from living voices. They were souls caught between worlds, robbers unjustly hanged, assassins forgotten in dungeons, executioners who died without remorse. 𝕾𝖃𝖃 raised his weapon and drew it noisily across the salt ground, drawing a new circle. From that circle, shadows began to rise. The first was 𝕭𝖃𝖃, a desert thief, with a rusty iron mask and daggers still glued to her palms. Then 𝕾𝖃𝖃, a warrior woman, killed by her own tribe. Her body was made of sand that did not fall, and her eyes were green like snakes. And one by one, they began to appear, Ramag, Daster, 𝕾𝖃𝖃, all those who had not found peace, now drawn by the call of 𝕭𝖃𝖃. I bind them to me, said Karzab. Not out of fear, but out of duty. I give them a body, I give them a cause. The world has cast them down, I raise them up. 𝕾𝖃𝖃, watching the shadows solidify and become warriors, asked. And when do we attack Larsa? 𝕭𝖃𝖃 Karzab looked at the sky. A black eagle hovered above, a sign that the air was already contaminated. Larsa will fear, and fear is the first traitor. We will come when their walls are only decorations. When the priests quarrel and the guard trembles in their dreams, we do not attack, we enter. From the top of the hill, a greenish light began to pulse. Tea was the altars of invocation, now fueled by every soul gathered. Every drop of hatred, regret, guilt, all became armor and sword in the army of shadows. Will they fight for me? 𝕭𝖃𝖃 Karzab asked. No, said 𝕾𝖃𝖃. They will fight because they cannot die. That night, the salt hills did not sleep. The wind did not blow. The earth was no longer silent, and the subterranean darkness, an army without death took shape, and Larsa, untouched, still dreams of tomorrow. Chapter 20. Shadows enter the city. In the depths of the salt hills, where the stones murmured ancient curses, 𝕭𝖃𝖃 Karzab looked westward, towards the city of Larsa, his eyes empty, devoid of light. Beside him, loyal and motionless, stood 𝕾𝖃𝖃, the creature with the head of a jackal and the body of a man, a presence that vibrated with dark power. It is time, said 𝕭𝖃 Karzab, in a voice like a hoarse echo in sealed tombs. 𝕭𝖃 and 𝕾𝖃 will sow fear. Larsa will bleed before she falls. 𝕾𝖃𝖃 nodded. From behind a pillar of salt, two black figures emerged, weightless, soundless. They were 𝕭𝖃, his face covered by a rusty mask and daggers glued to his hands, and 𝕾𝖃, his body made of compact sand, his eyes shining in an infernal green light. They were shadows, but they had human form, with the power to kill, but they could not be killed. Go to Larsa, 𝕭𝖃 Karzab ordered. Don't take their city. Take their minds. And so, the next night, Larsa was filled with shadows. At first, no one understood. In the morning, the masons and merchants found the bodies of some guards torn apart as if by the claws of beasts. Then, in the temple area, the deputy priest of Utu was found lifeless, his eyes burning with an inexplicable green light. On the third night, 𝕭𝖃 and 𝕾𝖃 entered the guard barracks. They killed 12 soldiers in complete silence, and when others tried to fight, the arrows passed through their shadows without touching them. Tamar appeared in the central square. Without saying a word, she raised her hand. Child began to scream without stopping, then fainted. When she came to, she no longer knew how to speak. Panic. Run. Chaos. The sound of emergency bells broke the silence. Governor Mardakahi, an old man with harsh eyes and a straight back, hastily summoned the 4 leaders of the city: Siritu, the high priest of Utu; Asherah, the leader of the city guard; 𝕾𝖙𝖙𝖑𝖊, the master of the walls and defense engineer; and 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖑𝖊, the archivist and royal advisor. And the council chamber. Fires were burning. But shadows danced restlessly on the walls, as if the city itself was afraid. "They are not men," Asherah said, frowning, her hand on the hilt of her sword. "My sword went through one, it did not waver. They are spirits," Siritu said. "Spirits from another world. Not dead. Not living. We know who sends them, don't we?" 𝕾𝖙𝖑𝖊 muttered. "Ashazur." They all looked at him in silence. 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖑𝖊 raised his voice. "Our only chance is to ask for help from Uruk. Only King 𝕭𝖙𝖔𝖗𝖞 has the power to mobilize sufficient force." Mardakahi clapped his hands once. Shudder and 𝕭𝖊𝖒𝖕, veteran soldiers, hastily sent to the city-state of Uruk. Without delay, dead.On that day, the 2 soldiers, Shudder, with his red-dyed beard and bronze helmet, and 𝕭𝖊𝖒𝖕, younger but swift and devoted, received the governor's seal, a bag with the city's seal, and a message written on a clay tablet. The 2 rode on black stallions with simple saddles, dressed in traveling clothes with thick cloaks and iron swords at their hips. They set off north, through the eastern gate, the wind blowing panic dust behind them. Behind, Larsa was under siege by shadows. The streets were empty, the temples guarded by armed priests. Vigil fires burned at the intersections. People were no longer sleeping, and somewhere, on the old wall of a ruined building, someone had found a symbol unknown, deeply carved, with curved lines and dots like empty eyes. It was the sign of Ashazur, and the city was just beginning to feel the horror of a curse that knew no death. Chapter 21. The Road to Uruk. The wind blew cold and harsh along the Ninsar Valley, where old stone trade roads were strewn with the tracks of thieves, the howls of jackals and legends of things that walk in the night. Shudder and 𝕭𝖭𝖙𝖕𝖕, riding their black stallions, advanced without stopping, carrying in their sealed bag the clay seal of the city of Larsa and the grave message of dispatch. "Help Larsa under siege of shadows. Ashazur returns." The sky was covered with gray clouds. The sun did not pierce the clouds, and around them it seemed that everything, the reeds, the trees, even the river, looked on in silence. "Do you feel the weight of your helmet?" asked 𝕭𝖭𝖙𝖕𝖕, looking over his shoulder. Shudder, older and with features like carved stone, nodded. "Not the helmet. Fear it hangs in the air. They are following us at the same moment. The shadow of a figure crossed the road, although there was no tree, no man there. Something walked alongside them, invisible and foreign. 2 hours passed, and as the sun approached the horizon, the road led them among the red rocks near 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖕. There they were awaited. Out of the dust and smoke emerged 3 soldiers from the hill of salt. Their bodies seemed human, but they did not breathe. Their eyes gleamed green. Their skin was gray, and their movements, immortal. Shudder and 𝕭𝖭𝖙𝖕𝖕 drew their swords. "They found us!" 𝕭𝖭𝖙 shouted. The first of the enemies rushed at 𝕭𝖭𝖙 with a rusty spear. The fight was short and cruel. A blade passed through the shadow soldier, without effect. Another grabbed 𝕭𝖭𝖙's arm and plunged a bone dagger into his rib. Shudder, with a war cry, cut through the third enemy, trying to protect his comrade. But the shadows did not bleed. They did not fall. They did not flee. Then the earth trembled slightly, and a thread of golden yellow light fell from the sky. Above them, in the distance, a shining symbol had appeared, a solar twist, the sign of Utu, etched in the air with invisible fire. The voice of Siritu, the high priest, echoed across the valleys, without his lips being there. "Curse bound to bone and darkness, I, Siritu of the house of Utu, I stop in the name of the Son of Justice." The shadows began to tremble. Smoke began to rise from them, their skin decomposed, their eyes went out. Then, one by one, they disappeared, as if they had never been. Shudder crawled towards 𝕭𝖭𝖙𝖕𝖕, who was lying on the ground, his eyes open but lost in emptiness. Deep wounds furrowed his chest, and blood flowed in streams. "No. I can't go any more," 𝕭𝖭𝖙 whispered. "You, go. Tell them. I'm coming." Shudder took him in his arms for a moment, closed his eyelids and left the sword in his hands. "Stay guard, I and Larsa, the world is still fighting." Then he stood up, his shoulders aching and his ankles heavy with dust and pain. 2 more days passed, and in the evening, the great gates of Uruk were visible in the distance. The watchtowers, tall and imposing, guarded the southern gate. Beyond, the painted clay walls, squares and hanging gardens of the royal palace awaited news. Shudder, dusty, bloodied, his clothes torn and his eyes red from sleeplessness, stepped onto the white stone of the royal court and fell to his knees before the palace guards. From Mardukâhi, ruler of Larsa, he whispered, "Ashazur has emerged from the salt hills. Larsa is shrouded in shadows. A guard has returned and sounded the alarm. In less than an hour, the message reached King 𝕭𝖙𝖔𝖗, and Uruk learned, for the first time, that something ancient and terrifying had begun to move in the darkness." Chapter 22. In the Lion Hall of Uruk. The palace of Uruk was quiet, but its silence was not one of peace, but of expectation. That evening, after messengers from Larsa brought news of the attacks of Karzab and Ashazur, King 𝕭𝖙𝖔𝖗 convened a war council in the Lion Hall. The gilded columns, the obsidian floor, and the glorious symbols of Anu and Utu seemed colder than ever. Around the royal table sat the generals, the priests, and the wise elders. Deity, the head of the table, imposing, with the royal purple robe and the staff carved from cedar. King 𝕭𝖙𝖙 spoke. "Larsa asks for our help. Not a city, but an entire world is threatened. Ashazur, of whom our chronicles say that he was cursed never to walk among the living, has been awakened. And now he bears the face of Karzab. This is not a revolt, it is a call of death against life." General 𝕊𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖑𝖊, his heavy armor and a scar across his cheek, stood up. "Great king, grant us permission to march. 10,000 spears can reach Larsa in 5 days, if we go with water and without a supply wagon. Just say the word." And 𝕭𝖙𝖙 looked straight into 𝕊𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖑𝖊's eyes. 10,000 men. But not only spears will serve us in this fight. All turned their gazes to the high priest of Uruk, who had slowly risen from the shadows. He was old, with a long, braided beard, and in his eyes burned the silences of 1,000 years. His name was 𝕊𝖭, and he was known to few as Nikalla's father. "The great darkness cannot be pierced with iron alone," he said in a deep voice, "but with knowledge and the blood of those who dare to speak the cursed name. Karzab is no longer Karzab. Ashazur, the son of nothingness, has joined him. They are one spirit, one power, and one weakness." All were silent. "There is only one ritual that can break the curse of this fusion. It has been kept secret since the fall of the old temple, when Utu himself was betrayed by his servants. I know the words. But I have guarded them all my life, for once spoken, they demand a great sacrifice, a heart that renounces itself." King 𝕭𝖙𝖙 was silent for a moment. Then he nodded. "𝕊𝖭, you will go with the army. You will carry not the sword, but the word. If the curse can be broken, then you are the only one who can succeed. And," he lowered his voice, "perhaps you will find your daughter again, where the fight is harder than it seems." The priest bowed his head. "I will, for Larsa, for Uruk, and for her." That night, the war drum beat in Uruk, for the first time in 30 years. The red flags were raised. The scribes wrote the orders. The trumpets sounded the call in the squares. 10,000 soldiers were preparing. And among them, the old 𝕊𝖭, the one who carried in his bosom a secret heavier than a sword. The fight against the darkness was beginning. Chapter 23. Roads of Fire and the Priest's Dream. The sun had not yet risen over the walls of Uruk when the army set out. 10,000 footsteps echoed along the stone roads in a heavy silence. Only the bells of the temples and the chants of the holy servants accompanied them, and women and elders threw date flowers and sprinkled holy water. The head of the column, on an old, pitch-black horse, 𝕊𝖭 walked with his staff, wearing a white woolen cloak, adorned with the solar signs of the god Utu on his shoulders, a shawl woven with golden threads, a legacy from the high priest 𝕊𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖑𝖊, kept the symbols of the 7 circles of time, where only the high priests were allowed to enter with their minds and souls. Beside him rode the generals, among whom was 𝕊𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖑𝖊 in his armor dark, resembling a living shadow rather than a mortal. After a full day's march, they pitched camp near the springs of the little Euphrates, in a gentle valley, where fig and date palms offered shade, and the water flowed cool and clear. The tents were pitched neatly. Each cohort had its place. The flags fluttered in the gentle evening wind. The soldiers cleaned their spears, kicked off their dusty sandals, and the cooks lit fires. The smell of roasting meat and boiling lentils spread through the trees. 𝕊𝖭 retired to his tent, a simple shelter of hempen cloth, but with the signs of the sun god drawn on the inside sides. There, on a thick carpet, he placed his old clay with sacred inscriptions, lit 3 butter candles of goat's milk, and whispered the ancient prayer. "Utu, radiance of the sky, I that sees the past and the future, enlighten me. Send me a sign. I am the darkness that is coming. Show me where the sword of curse falls and where the flame of life beats. Then he laid his head on a consecrated lambskin and closed his eyes. It seemed that he was in a deserted city, with walls of salt and an air of death. The sky was red as blood, and the sun was not visible, only a shadow that held its place. Black hands came out of the ground, stretched out towards him. Whispering in inhuman voices, from the shadow appeared Karzab, or what Karzab had been, but his face was distorted by something else. His eyes burned with a blue flame, and from his chest came a thick fog, like the smoke of death. Behind him stood 𝕵𝖃𝖒𝖕𝖊, the jackal-headed creature, who howled soundlessly. But the most frightening thing was the sky. From it descended a ladder of fire, and on it walked a woman with a torch. She had the face of Nikalla, but she was older, with eyes bathed in golden tears. Father, not with the sword will you break the curse, but with the name forgotten in the stars, not forget the oath taken at my birth. Then the dream broke. 𝕿𝖊𝖙 woke up with a scream in his throat. The lights in the tent were out. Outside, the wind and the crackling of fires could be heard. With his forehead wet with sweat, he whispered, "The forgotten name, the stars, and the oath." Then he gathered his cloak around his shoulders and left the tent. He looked out into the night, where the soldiers slept by the fires, their spears stuck in the ground. The fight that was to come was not just about blood, but about ancient times and unspoken oaths. And the key was his own daughter, Nikalla. Chapter 24. The Hidden Eye of Heaven. Larsa had fallen asleep under the weight of a silent night, and in the governor's palace, the oil lamps burned weakly, casting long shadows on the walls covered with solar frescoes. In one of the upper rooms, Nikalla stood motionless, her forehead pressed against the cold stone of the windowsill beyond the walls. The desert shone in the moonlight like a sea of ash. She could not sleep. A strange restlessness had gathered in her soul, like deep water beginning to boil without fire, since she had arrived. In Larsa, people's words and looks had become more oppressive. The prisoners under interrogation spoke of shadows that walk by day, and the elders of the city murmured prayers to the stars, avoiding the name Ashazur. Without knowing why, that night, Nikalla rose from her fine linen bed, sat on the burnt clay floor, and began to breathe deeply, in the style of the ancient art of calming the mind, as she had learned from her father. As in the darkness, she felt the air thin, and the world around her seemed to disappear. Then came the vision. She was in a room she had never seen before, but she recognized it was the sacred chamber in the Temple of Utu, where only the high priest was allowed to enter during eclipse ceremonies. 𝕿𝖊𝖙 knelt in the center of the room. Around her, 8 lines of fire had spun on their own, forming a circle. His face was older, more tired, but his eyes burned with a light. In one hand she held the serpent-headed staff, and in the other, a tablet of unburned clay, covered with symbols that Nikalla understood without reading. The curse of Ashazur can only be broken by the blood born under the sign of Utu, purified by fire and darkness. Then, 𝕿𝖊𝖙's face turned to her. "Nikalla, your blood bears the seal. You were chosen not by the gods, but by time. You must remember your true name, the unspoken one." "My name," Nikalla whispered in her dream, but her father's voice disintegrated like steam as a black shadow descended over the temple, swallowing the fire and the words. And that shadow, a figure appeared, Karzab-Ashazur, in a cloak of ash and a crown of bone on his forehead. Behind him rose unburied souls, haunting, bound with chains of unheard sounds. Then the dream broke. Nikalla woke suddenly, her heart beating chaotically and her chest damp with sweat. The air in the room was heavy, and for a moment she felt she was no longer alone. Then, silence fell again. She stood up and looked at the sky beyond the thin curtain. Shooting star had streaked the horizon, and a faint smell of burning incense came from the Temple of Larsa. In that moment, she understood that the connection between her and her father had not been dream. 𝕿𝖊𝖙 had sent him a warning, a beginning of a path, day.Dawn. He would ask for an audience with the council of the wise in Larsa. He had to find out what the ruins in the south of the city hid. There, deep in the earth, he felt that the key lay. The key to the curse, and perhaps her forgotten name. Chapter 25. The Hill of Salt. The sun was slowly creeping through the gray mist that covered the horizon, and 𝕭𝖃𝖏's army of 10,000 soldiers, led by General 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖕𝖏, had already advanced for 2 days across the dry plain between Uruk and Larsa. Their tents had been erected rigorously, in straight rows, on the edge of a valley of whitish clay, near the Hill of Salt, a place where even the wind did not blow naturally. That morning, the silence had a strange weight. The horses were whinnying, the guard dogs refused to advance, and the ground, under the steps of the tent-makers, vibrated weakly, like an old heart. And then the shadows came. No sound of trumpets, no step of armor. Only mists in the shape of men, clothed in darkness, with dull eyes and arms that looked like tar fumes. The shadows had risen from the barren soil of the Salt Hill, as if they had been buried there for centuries. Cries of alarm broke out throughout the camp. But swords and spears passed through those fleshless enemies. With each touch, a soldier fell, his blood stopped, his eyes blurred, life slipped away without a trace. Over 500 men perished in less than an hour. Panic spread. "These are not alive," an officer shouted. "Flee," others shouted. Some threw down their shields, others knelt. Then 𝕿𝖊𝖙𝖕𝖑𝖊, the priest of Uruk, dressed in his golden linen cloak and with his staff in his hands, stepped forward, climbing a stone mound. Raising his arms, he began to sing in a low voice, speaking the words of the ancient incantation guarded in the temple for hundreds of years. "Light of the gods, you who parted the shadows of the beginning, penetrate the wounds of the world. You, who gave the sun a name, break the chain of non-being. Utu, Utu, Utu." A circle of light descended from the sky, slowly, like a white curtain. The waves of the spell seemed to burn the air. The shadows began to tremble, then to fall apart, like spider webs torn by the wind. Then, nothing became quiet again. The soldiers, who remained standing, fell to their knees. General 𝕊𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖑𝖊 approached 𝕿𝖊𝖙𝖕𝖑𝖊. "Priest, what were these?" "Remains, of souls that were not allowed to leave. Nameless bodies, bound by a curse older than our cities." The evening fell heavy, the sky red as blood mixed with ash. The soldiers, exhausted and terrified, gathered around the fires. The guards were doubled. Even the bravest watched in the darkness with trembling fingers on the hilts of their swords. But no one could be prepared for what came next. Midnight, a thick, viscous fog rose from the hill, swallowing the torches, and the middle of it, Karzab-Ashazur appeared. He was a tall figure, dressed in a black cloak sewn with small skulls. His face was pale, with eyes as empty as dried-up wells, an open wound burned on his forehead, and a snake of smoke came out of his body. What seemed alive? Around him, the air had taken on the scent of blood and the grave. The soldiers froze. Some broke ranks, others screamed and fled. Only a few, the veterans of Uruk, remained where they were, though with their hearts clenched like a fist on fire. 𝕿𝖊𝖙𝖕𝖑𝖊 stepped forward again. This time, his staff glowing faintly. Ashazur, nameless, returned from the mists by the desire of those who know not what their name is. "I am 𝕿𝖊𝖙𝖕𝖑𝖊, son of the fire of Utu. Return to the depths. Your son calls to me in my dream. Priest, Karzab-Ashazur hissed. Your daughter opened my gate with her blood." His words were like nails driven into the sacred stone. But 𝕿𝖊𝖙𝖕𝖑𝖊 did not weaken. He stuck his staff into the ground. From it shot a white ray that pierced the air, breaking the mist. Karzab-Ashazur writhed, screaming in a voice that mixed with thousands of voices. "I curse you, 𝕿𝖊𝖙𝖕𝖑𝖊. I will come again when the heavenly blood is mixed with the mortal." And it was gone. An explosion of shadows scattered in all directions. The sky became black and silent again. The next morning, the army was on its knees before 𝕿𝖊𝖙𝖕𝖑𝖊, his back straight and his eyes sad, spoke solemnly. "Without your faith, we would have perished. By your will, priest, let us lead to Larsa. Let us finish what was begun in darkness." 𝕿𝖊𝖙𝖕𝖑𝖊 bowed his head, and in his heart a new fear had taken root. Karzab-Ashazur had not been completely defeated, had only been driven away, for a while. Chapter 26. The Parchment of Fire. Larsa quivered like a harp touched by a strange wind. On the walls, soldiers hammered nails into new beams, erected platforms for archers, and removed vats of hot oil from the citadel storerooms and the inner squares. Messengers ran with orders, and old priests murmured prayers in the ancient tongue, while women and children were moved to underground shelters. Was known Ashazur had come. And he would come again. And the Temple of Utu, on the sacred hill in the center of the citadel, high priest Siritu walked heavily, his brow furrowed, his bronze-plated sandalwood staff trembling in his hand. Nikalla walked beside him, his face furrowed with sleeplessness, but his gaze sharp and clear. The vision of 2 nights ago followed her, and his face her father, 𝕿𝖊𝖙𝖕𝖑𝖊, had imprinted himself on her soul like a seal. She felt his calling, as if a mysterious, living water flowed between them. "Here," Siritu said finally, reaching a low door hidden behind the jade altar. Most believed that corner of the temple had been closed since the death of High Priest 𝕭𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖑𝖊 40 years ago. But Siritu knew, on nights of great silence, he had descended there with a torch in his hands and prayers on his lips. The door opened with a deep creak. Behind it, a stone staircase descended into darkness, where even incense dared not reach. They descended. After 20 steps, they stepped into a low-vaulted chamber. A single lamp burned on a bronze stand. On the eastern wall was a stone slab with almost faded symbols. Nikalla approached. One of the signs pulsed faintly, as if an unseen touch were waking it. She raised her hand and, without looking, he touched it. A dull sound, like the sigh of an old tomb, resounded. The wall slowly parted. Behind him, there was a niche, and in the niche, a scroll of dark leather, wrapped in strips of burnt cloth around the edges. "This is the fire text," Siritu whispered. Written by 𝕭𝖃𝖙, the last scribe of Uruk before the great flood. It is said to have been dictated by a fallen star, whispering in the forgotten language of the gods. Nikalla carefully unfolded the parchment. The letters seemed to have been written not with ink, but with powdered charcoal mixed with blood. Although old, the text had not faded. In one corner there was a representation, a man and a jackal-headed being, 𝕭𝖃𝖙, holding a crown of bone above an altar of salt. Siritu read in a trembling voice. When the shadow takes form from robber and bone, and the evil blood calls the shadows of the unwashed, only the crossroads stone can break the bond. "What is the crossroads stone?" Nikalla asked, as a cold fear ran up her spine. Siritu fell silent. She ran her fingers over the last line of the parchment. There was a phrase written in an even older dialect, which only those initiated into solar wisdom could decipher. "The crossroads stone is not a stone. T is a heart, soul that knows both paths, of light and of darkness, man who was close to death and returned." Nikalla froze. "My father." Siritu looked at her for a long time. It was clear to him that she was no longer just a temple scholar. The girl had become part of the fabric of destiny. "Then," he said, "we have only one way, to bring 𝕿𝖊𝖏 to Larsa, and until he arrives, you will defend the temple, with all it contains." Nikalla nodded. She bowed before the parchment and murmured, for the first time in the voice of a true priestess, "May Utu see, know, and burn the shadow that is coming." Outside the temple, clouds were beginning to gather. Chapter 27 Blood in the Sand. A heavy leaden mist was approaching from the east, and behind it, the salt hill had begun to bleed. The north of the salt hill, the sky was not skied. It was a dark wound. The wind whistled in the language of the forgotten, and behind the waves of dust, shadows gathered that had no bodies or outlines of suffering. They walked with torn faces, without eyes, their mouths gaping in an eternal howl. They were the souls of robbers, of criminals killed without forgiveness, those who had not found their way to the realms of the dead, and in their midst stood Karzab-Ashazur, the cursed fusion of the former prisoner and the one nicknamed Shadow of Ashes. The black cloak flowed from his shoulders, but instead of fabric, it was made of black flames that did not were shining under the hood. His eyes gleamed a sickly red, like two agonized suns. Beside him, 𝕭𝖃𝖙, with his jackal head and muscular blue-gray body, knelt before a salt pit opened in the ground. Bodies were emerging from it. Dead, but not dead. Pierced, burned, crushed, they rose under the curse's call. "Enough for a second blow," Karzab-Ashazur muttered, his voice sounding like 1,000 nails on stone. "The army of Uruk is tired. They have lost Targil and 3 other captains. If we tear them in two now, nothing will stand between us and Larsa," 𝕭𝖃𝖙 said, rising. "Make the sky bleed," Karzab-Ashazur commanded. Extending his hand, 𝕭𝖃𝖙 raised a great spear, forged from black bones and bloodstones. Struck by the earth with it, he raised a column of fire that pierced the clouds, and the horde set off again on the road to Larsa. The army of Uruk had barely managed to regroup. The camp moved slowly through the thick sand, and the transport camels staggered exhausted. The priest 𝕿𝖏𝖏, Nikalla's father, walked in the lead. Not like a warrior, but like a living flame. His eyes burned, and in his left hand he held the staff with the head of a snake, and in the other he carried an ancient amulet, round, of white gold, engraved with the symbol of the inverted sun. Around him, even the air seemed to tremble. "I'm coming," he said shortly, and before the guards could see any form, the sky turned black. The shadows came howling, with bone axes, cursed arrows, and their faces covered in black beasts. There were hundreds, perhaps thousands, and at their head 𝕭𝖃𝖙, running on all fours, leaping between rocks with the agility of a demon. "Form the shield circle," shouted Commander Zamir, raising his sword. But the enemy was too close. The battle broke out in waves. Fire, blood, screams. The soldiers of Uruk fought bravely, but each slain shadow transformed into another, hungrier. 𝕿𝖏𝖏 stood on a mound and raised his staff. Words came from his mouth in a language that even the priests no longer spoke. The earth trembled beneath his feet, light yellow, like the sun descending to earth, exploded from around him and engulfed the circle of warriors. The shadows stopped. Some melted on the spot, others fled, screaming in the language of the beyond. But the price had been cruel. 300 soldiers lay dead. Karzab-Ashazur appeared on a ridge above the battle. Looking at 𝕿𝖏𝖏, he raised his hand and pulled back his hood. Beneath it, there was no human face, only a mask of smoking bones. "So you are the crossroads stone," he muttered. "I will have to break you." 𝕿𝖊𝖙 frowned, but said nothing. He just clenched his staff and strode toward the battle, step by step, among the dead. And then, at the sound, the earth shook. A long, resounding horn came from the south. The gate of Larsa had opened, cloud of dust rose from the plain, and in it, golden shields, tall spears, and blue banners with the symbol of the shining sun could be seen. Their head rode a man in a bronze helmet and a purple cloak. 𝕿𝖊𝖙, shouted one of the officers of Uruk. The feared and respected general of Larsa came with 1,500 well-trained soldiers. The flanks of the army opened, and the spearmen ran down towards the enemy. Karzab-Ashazur looked at the scene and sighed. The shadows swirled around him, restless. "Not today," he whispered. A puff of smoke exploded around him, and Karzab-Ashazur and 𝕿𝖊𝖙 vanished like shadows in the wind. In the evening, the defeated and weary armies settled at the edge of the field. Nikalla was brought on horseback, and when she saw 𝕿𝖊𝖙, she dismounted and ran to him. Father and daughter embraced in silence. 𝕿𝖊𝖙 and Siritu stood side by side, looking east. "This was only the prelude," the general said. Siritu nodded. "The real fight begins tomorrow." Chapter 28. The Seal of Fire. In the great hall of the sand palace of Larsa, fires burned in bronze goblets, and incense steam flowed like unseen serpents between the columns. Above them, the vaulted ceiling was painted with solar scenes. Utu in a golden chariot, fighting the shadow god 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖑𝖊. In the center, the council table had been opened. On it were placed maps, parchments, and clay tablets. Around it, the most powerful men of the moment. 𝕿𝖊𝖙, the general of Larsa, with a new scar on his cheek and a harsh voice. 𝕿𝖊𝖙, the priest returned from the dead, silent and imposing, his eyes fixed on the flames in the sacred vessel. Nikalla, 𝕿𝖊𝖙's daughter, wearing for the first time the yellow robes of the great vestal of the solar temple. Siritu, the old priest of Utu, his hands trembling but his mind sharp. And other officers, scribes, messengers, district chiefs, all with weary but tense faces. 𝕿𝖊𝖙 began. "Karzab-Ashazur is more than a man. He and the beast of 𝕿𝖊𝖙 gather around them shadows of the past, bound by spilled blood and ancient curses. If we let him reach the salt wall, Larsa will fall." A murmur rose from the ranks of the officers. 𝕿𝖊𝖙 leaned forward slightly. "No, the walls will save us. But what we bind within the temple?" All eyes turned to him. "The curse that keeps Karzab-Ashazur alive is not just an act of magic, but an unholy pact made on the night of the great equinox. It was sealed in the Valley of the Dead, in that hill of salt. Now, the only chance to break the bond between his body and shadow is to raise a counter-seal, an ancient ritual known only to those who bear the blood of solar initiates." Siritu sighed. "The ritual of the Seal of Fire, hasn't been done for 200 years. The last time, it burned 3 of the young priests and closed the mouth of a chasm in southern Ishtar." Nikalla looked up. "I will do it." 𝕿𝖊𝖙 shook his head. "It takes 2.1 to summon the light, and another to confront the shadow and pull it into the seal ring," 𝕿𝖊𝖙 asked, almost with fear. "And who can do that? Who can stand face to face with the curse without perishing?" 𝕿𝖊𝖙 was silent for a moment. Then, he placed his amulet on the table. "Me." Everyone froze. "Father," Nikalla murmured, "you will die." "Maybe, but if the shadows enter Larsa, everything will die. I have been between the two worlds before. Now I can walk again, but not alone. You have learned all that I have hidden from you. If you invoke the seal in the chamber of the sun and draw the ring in blood, I will hold the curse in place long enough to break it." Siritu stood up heavily. "We will need 4 ash pots of oak, 3 bronze spears with uncleaned tips, and the pure flame from Utu's original altar." "That flame died out 50 years ago," said a younger priest. "No," Nikalla said, "it was never extinguished. It was taken to the tomb of 𝕊𝖙𝖏𝖕. I saw in the hidden text that it burns there, between 2 golden mirrors, still alive." 𝕿𝖊𝖙 sighed. "Then we send men there. Who offers to bring it?" A young warrior, with green eyes and barely used armor, stepped forward. "My name is 𝕭𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖑𝖏. I grew up among the ancient ruins. I can get there. With 2 men, by tomorrow at dusk." 𝕿𝖊𝖙 approved. "Goat, if you do not return in time, Larsa will not have the fire needed for the seal." 𝕿𝖊𝖙 stood up. He took a deep breath. "In 3 days, night and day will meet in their circle. Then the ritual must be performed, and the Temple of Utu, under the vault of the mirrored sun." All agreed. The council was dissolved, and silence. No war cry, no drum. Just heavy footsteps, trembling hands, and eyes in which burned the unrelenting fire of hope. Chapter 29. The Fire of the Deep. Night had fallen over the walls of Larsa, but in the inner courtyard of the Temple of Utu, 3 shadows prepared their departure. 3 figures dressed in traveling clothes, with torches strapped to their hips and short weapons hidden under their cloaks. 𝕭𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖕, the young warrior with green eyes and sure steps, opened the side gate, guarded by a single sentry who bowed his head respectfully. Behind him came Nikalla, the daughter of the priest 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕, wearing a cherry cloak over the yellow tunic of a great vestal. Her dark eyes shone with determination and anxiety. The third was 𝕭𝖊𝖒𝖕, the young scribe who, although not chosen for battle, had insisted on coming, had with him a bag full of clay tablets, a branch of incense, and an old amulet, given to him by Nikalla 2 seasons ago. He wore it now, hidden at his chest. This way, 𝕭𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖕 murmured, taking a narrow path that led southeast, where the ruins of the sacred tomb rose from the sand like a thorn of oblivion. The terrain became more and more rugged. The hills were covered with dry grass and thistles, and the wind whistled through the sharp rocks. On the horizon, 3 white stars seemed to watch over them. "Do you think the fire still burns after so many decades?" 𝕭𝖊𝖒𝖕 asked, looking up at the sky. Nikalla didn't answer immediately. He ran his fingers over a symbol engraved on his copper bracelet, the sign of the sun god. "It is not the fire that awaits us, but we who must be worthy to receive it." 𝕭𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖕 nodded. "The sacred fire is not like the others. If your heart trembles with fear or greed, it burns you. If you are pure, it receives you. And if you are just a scribe?" 𝕭𝖊𝖒𝖕 murmured. Nikalla looked at him for a moment. She said nothing, but in that silence, her eyes seemed to answer him. After 3 hours of walking, they arrived. The tomb of 𝕭𝖊𝖒𝖕 was a collapsed structure, half buried in the sand. Above, shattered columns, carved with spirals of flames and the faces of frowning gods, seemed to look at them with disapproval. "The entrance is on the north side," said 𝕭𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖕. "It is built of slabs, but I was here when I was a child. I saw a man from the sand tribes enter through a crack. They searched. They found a narrow opening, hidden by wild grasses. Nikalla lit a torch and entered first. They descended through a narrow stone corridor. The air was heavy, smelling of ash and oblivion. On the walls, the murals still retained their outlines. 𝕭𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖕 taming a living flame, a circle of kneeling priests, and a hand stretched out to the sky. "It's here," Nikalla whispered. They arrived in a vaulted room, with a deep niche in the middle. There, between 2 golden mirrors blackened by time, the flame still burned, weak, like a breeze of hope, but alive. "It's alive," said 𝕭𝖊𝖒𝖕, with moist eyes. Nikalla approached slowly, took a special clay cup from his cloak, covered with the symbols of Utu. "It must be taken without trembling." "Leave me alone," said 𝕭𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖕. But when he touched the flame with the cup, it retreated, trembling, then burst out with a bluish flash and threw a beam into 𝕭𝖊𝖒𝖕's chest. The young man fell to his knees. Screaming, Nikalla shouted, "𝕭𝖊𝖒𝖕!" 𝕭𝖊𝖒𝖕 drew his sword, thinking he was being attacked. But Nikalla stopped him. 𝕭𝖊𝖒𝖕 stood up trembling. Sign had appeared on his forehead, a spiral of light, drawn as if in flesh. "The flame chose me," he murmured. Nikalla looked at him, shocked and moved. "You are the one who will carry it." 𝕭𝖊𝖒𝖕 took the cup. The flame danced in her like a heart. She didn't even feel that she was holding It. It didn't burn. It didn't hurt him. "Let's go. Larsa is waiting for us." They emerged from the tomb before sunrise, and the gray sky, the first rays of the morning sun, sent pale rays across the sands. But in their hands, a flame older than dawn burned brightly, and, beyond the horizon, the shadows of Karzab moved. Chapter 30. Beyond the Salt Hills. The wind blew like a howl among the ruins of the Salt Hills. The earth cracked under the steps of an army that did not breathe, did not sleep, and did not know its death. At the top of a white rise, Karzab stood, dressed in armor as black as the starless night, his cloak fluttering in the cold gusts. His body, though molded of flesh and bone, pulsed with liquid shadows. His gaze was lost between worlds, and from his chest sometimes came whispers that did not belong to him. Beside him, 𝕭𝖊𝖒𝖕, the beast, with the body of a man and the head of a jackal, stood motionless. His gray, tense muscles seemed carved from living stone. His yellow eyes shone with a gentle cruelty, like a beast that sniffs its prey without haste. In the valley, thousands of shadows gathered, beasts with bare ribs, men pierced by unseen arrows, thieves, assassins, mercenaries betrayed and forgotten, all bound by oaths of blood and punishment. They laughed without lips. They sang without voices, and their hands, weapons of smoke and steel, awaited their call. Karzab raised his hand. A dark, cold, dense flame flowed from his palm. "The circle is almost complete," he said. "When the blood of the 𝕿𝖊𝖒 touches the sunstone, I will pass beyond the threshold. Not just cursed, but reborn and eternal," 𝕭𝖊𝖒𝖕 muttered. "The temple is guarded. The priestess has already sensed the weakness. Larsa prepares a seal. They will lift it too late, said Karzab-Ashazur. Her father must die during the ritual. But I will break the circle and enter, not as a shadow, but as a king. 𝕵𝖃𝖕𝖕 turned his head to the south. They have already started, I felt them. They have the flame. Karzab-Ashazur smiled. Let them come. Their flame will not touch the heart of the temple. I have sent what was to be sent. Above them, the sky began to darken. It was not night. There was a mist descending from the north, a fog that gathered around the living shadows. In it, huge figures floated, beasts of ancient times, bull skulls and steel eagles, summoned from the darkest dreams. In 3 days, the walls of Larsa will be but a memory, said 𝕵𝖃𝖕𝖕, and you will pass through the southern gate. No, said Karzab-Ashazur, I will enter through the Temple of Utu. Their flame will be quenched with blood, and Nikalla will see her light turn to darkness. And the valley, the army made a strange sound, not a cry, but a low vibration, like a grave whistle. The salt hills groaned. In the distance, Larsa lit torches on the walls. War was approaching. Chapter 31. The Abduction and the Journey of the Flame. At dawn on a cloudy morning, while fog still covered the streets of Larsa, the sound of trumpets rang out unexpectedly. Shadows had descended on the walls, and soldiers were running in all directions. No one expected the attack to come like this, while the protective ritual had barely begun. Nikalla, dressed in ceremonial robes, was in the temple courtyard when a gray figure leapt over the wall, cutting down 2 priests with a claw movement. Before anyone could react, 𝕵𝖃𝖕𝖕, the jackal-headed beast, snatched her from the altar, knocking her to the ground. Despite her resistance, Nikalla was immobilized, bound with ropes of solid smoke, and taken beyond the walls. Her cry was heard by the Sumerians, who left the cup of living flame in 𝕿𝖊𝖙's hands and ran outside, but it was too late. Only a dark vapor still hung in the air. Behind the walls, in the silent temple, 𝕿𝖊𝖦𝖕 and Siritu, who now formed a pair united by an oath of sword and soul, found 𝕭𝖃𝖏 on his knees. The young scribe trembled, but in his hands the cup with the living flame shone, unwavering, alive. They took her, he whispered. They took her to the arid Maru Valley. The land of oblivion. No one returns from there. Siritu, with her blue eyes and hair tied in warrior braids, touched his shoulder. Then we will be the first to return. 𝕿𝖊𝖏𝖏 nodded. The flame goes with us. Maybe only she will keep the shadows at bay. The journey to the arid Maru Valley took 2 days. It was a cursed place, located between canyons forgotten by the gods, where even birds no longer flew. Under the gloomy sky, the 3 passed over ancient stone bridges, through forests with dry trunks and black springs. One of the stops, 𝕭𝖃𝖏 stood with a cup in her hands. The living flame, although small, danced gently, and spoke in lost languages. Sometimes it showed him visions. Other times, it stirred his memories of Nikalla, how she smiled at him when she read the stars, how she put her hand on his cheek when he was tired. Siritu dreamed of war. 𝕿𝖊𝖏𝖏 cleaned his sword and sighed. But 𝕭𝖃𝖏, he lit the flame and said, for her, and for the light. The arid Maru Valley was a strange desert, with white, cracked rocks, heavy air and silence. In the middle of it, a sacrificial pit had been dug. Nikalla was tied to an altar, but her eyes betrayed no fear. She prayed, with her voice and her mind. She called the flame. She called 𝕭𝖃𝖏. In the distance, the 3 reached the edge of the valley. The flame in the cup suddenly burst out, burning red, then pure gold. It's here, 𝕭𝖃𝖏 whispered. She felt us. They sensed us too, said 𝕿𝖊𝖏𝖏, drawing her sword. From the shadows, eyeless guards rose, creatures of smoke and dried blood. But when the flame was lifted into the air by 𝕭𝖃𝖏, their screams began. Their skin crumbled, and their bodies fell like dust. They do not like the light, said Siritu with a bitter smile. The top of the altar, 𝕵𝖃𝖕𝖏 felt something change. The flame had come. Nikalla opened her eyes wide. They came for me, she whispered. The world is not lost. The fight was about to begin, but the fire of life was in the hands of those who did not give up. 𝕭𝖃𝖏, 𝕿𝖊𝖏𝖏, and Siritu walked towards the altar with determined steps, and the cup of the living flame now shone like an old sun, reborn from the ashes of a world on the edge of the abyss. Chapter 32. The Battle of the Arid Maru Valley and the Victorious Light. The arid Maru Valley was shrouded in thick shadows, and the wind blew like a sinister hiss between the white rocks, ragged by time. The tomb of 𝕊𝖏𝖏𝖏, an ancient sanctuary carved in black stone, sat in the middle of the valley like a promise of death and oblivion. Inside the tomb, Nikalla was tied to the sacrificial altar, her eyes searching for one more hope. The darkness around her seemed alive, and the echoes of her footsteps made her skin tremble with fear. But in her soul burned a light, 𝕭 living flame kept by the 𝕭𝖆𝖙. Outside, in the midst of the battle, 𝕭𝖆𝖙, 𝕭𝖆𝖙, and Siritu fought desperately against the dark creatures of Karzab-Ashazur and 𝕭𝖊𝖒𝖙𝖐𝖕. Monsters with the skin of their grey bodies, their eyes of embers and long fangs emerged from the sands, and their movements were like murderous ghosts. But at dawn, when the sun began to break through the clouds, two figures dressed in white robes with gold embroidery entered the valley. The priest 𝕿𝖊𝖙 of Uruk and the priest Siritu of Larsa. They held in their hands two sacred scepters, adorned with holy symbols and inlaid with lapis lazuli stones. The priests approached the tomb of 𝕭𝖆𝖙 and began to chant ancient incantations in the sacred language of the gods. Their voices rose, vibrating like thunder in the air, and their power spread through the valleys like a wave of warm light. 𝕭𝖆𝖙 fought with 𝕭𝖭𝖃 and 𝕭𝖆𝖙 and Siritu with Karzab-Ashazur, but as the priests continued the ritual, the shadows that the living flame from the cup of 𝕭𝖆𝖙 was penetrating the altar, slowly dissolving the wisps of smoke that held her prisoner. The voices of the priests reached her ears like a living call. With the last of her strength, Nikalla spoke a word of power that she had learned from her father and the priests. The fire from the living cup exploded in a blinding halo and the bonds were broken. She jumped from the altar and stepped out into the light of dawn. That moment, Karzab-Ashazur and 𝕭𝖊𝖒𝖙 tried to retreat, but the priests united their power in one last gesture. 𝕿𝖊𝖙, with a thunderous voice, speaking words of curse and exorcism, and Siritu, with sacred gestures, channeling the energy of the sun and divine fire, a blinding light enveloped the demons of darkness, and with an explosion that shook the valley, Karzab-Ashazur and 𝕭𝖊𝖒𝖙 were destroyed forever, transformed into purifying ash that scattered in the wind. Silence fell over the valley. The air had become clean, and the sun's rays fell gently on the exhausted but victorious faces of the three saviors. Nikalla looked at them with gratitude. Without you, without the power of the gods, and without the living flame, today I would not have been free, she said in a trembling voice. 𝕭𝖆𝖙 smiled and raised the cup to the sky. This flame will never be extinguished, as long as we keep faith, courage and light alive. 𝕭𝖆𝖙 and Siritu solemnly agreed, ready to bring the news back to Uruk and Larsa. Evil had been defeated, and peace could be reborn. Thus, with the help of faith, love and courage of those who united, the curse of Ashazur-Karzab was defeated forever, and Uruk and Larsa could look forward to a new beginning. Chapter 33. Shadows over Larsa. As the sun set dimly over the towers of Larsa, dark clouds gathered over the plains, a fierce wind blew from the east, and the drums of war could be heard in the distance. Beating like the heart of an angry god.It was the first sign of the coming of those who should not have existed. The shadows of the soldiers of the Salt Hills, created by Karzab-Ashazur from the souls of robbers and murderers, had arrived in black waves, wearing dull armor and swords that never glittered. They spoke no words, they felt no fear. They were only hatred and death, and the towers of Larsa, the commanders beat their drums, shouting orders. The united army of Uruk and Larsa, the 10,000 soldiers sent by King 𝕭𝖃𝖙 and the defenders of the Temple of Utu, were preparing for the final battle on the city walls. 𝕿𝖊𝖙, the priest of Uruk, and Siritu, the priest of Larsa, watched the crowd across the plain. Siritu whispered, "The hour of darkness has come, but also the hour of truth." 𝕿𝖊𝖙 held the tablet of curse in his hands, inherited from the ancient keepers of the word, and it was written the formula of exorcism, but it could only be spoken at the height of darkness, when all seemed lost. The attack came suddenly. Those from the Salt Hills rushed in silently, but with overwhelming force. The sword did not stop their steps. The arrow did not pierce their chests. When the soldiers of Larsa fell, their bodies were absorbed into the dust of the field, and their souls were almost drawn into non-existence. Many brave men perished, the guards of the temples, the archers of the south, the gatekeepers. Even some of the commanders, including the old 𝕊𝖃𝖃, who had also fought in the war with 𝕭𝖃, were cut in two by the sword of a nameless warrior. The battle seemed lost. The inner gates had been broken. The streets were becoming fields of death. But even then, when darkness had descended upon the temple and a swarm of shadows advanced towards the altar of Utu, 𝕿𝖊𝖙 and Siritu stepped into the middle of the square, flanked by the sacred tablets and facing west. 𝕿𝖊𝖙 raised the tablet and spoke. Shalmat in Lil, Amahuri Enki, Yugal Jibal Shamash. Siritu raised his voice at the same time. Ashadu Karimtu, Napishtu Urigal, Ashazir. With each word, the earth began to tremble. A white and red light, like a living flame, rose from the ground. The shadows stopped. The soldiers of the Hill of Salt began to scream without a sound. Their helmets shattered. Their armor fell to dust. Their souls, prisoners of the curse, had been released. A grave silence enveloped the field of those who had attacked. Nothing remained but dust and ashes. The sky brightened, and the first song of birds was heard after a long night. 𝕊𝖃alla, 𝕭𝖃, 𝕭𝖃𝖒 and Siritu had already reached the city, and the living flame burned in the Temple of Utu was a sign. The evil had been shattered. King 𝕭𝖙𝖔𝖗 sent messengers to all the cities. The victory was of the light. That day, Larsa learned that shadows can kill, but also that light can be reborn even from the deepest darkness, when people, priests, and faith unite. Chapter 34. The Light of the Oath. At dawn on the third day after the great battle, Larsa was covered in a heavy and peaceful silence. The smoke had cleared, the ashes had been gathered, and in the middle of the great square, between the Temple of Utu and the Jade Palace, the people gathered, not for war, but for remembrance. All those who had survived had come out in simple clothes, white cloths tied with linen ropes, a sign of pain, but also of hope. Not a sound of a weapon, not a sword resounded in the city, only a sea of silent faces. Looking towards the altar on which was raised the cup of the living flame, lit in honor of the lost, and the front row stood King 𝕭𝖙𝖔𝖗 of Uruk, dressed in a garment the color of burnt clay, and Governor Balasar of Larsa, in his bronze and turquoise cloak. Behind them, the priests of both cities, including 𝕿𝖃𝖙𝖒, 𝕊𝖃alla's father, and Siritu, carried the ancient scrolls to read them in the solemn rhythm of tradition. 𝕊𝖃alla, weak but steadfast, dressed in a white robe sewn with gold thread, rose on the steps of the temple and spoke. Her voice was clear, like the water of springs. Brothers of Uruk and Larsa, your blood flowed together, under the same sky and against the same darkness. Those who rose from the salt hills are no more, but their sacrifice, of those who faced them, compels us not to forget. Today, before the gods of heaven and earth, we bind ourselves again. We will never be enemies. We will be one people, one breath, one flame. Tears flowed down the cheeks of the crowd. Even the old warriors, who had seen sword and death in their lifetime, bowed their heads. After a moment of silence, 𝕿𝖃𝖃 stepped forward, holding the tablet of the new covenant, on which was engraved in cuneiform the following oath. In the name of the god Utu, of 𝕭𝖃 and of the Queen of Heaven Inanna, the cities of Uruk and Larsa bind themselves forever not to take up arms against each other, to share their bread, their springs, and their sword. May each son of one to be received as a brother in the other. 𝕭𝖙𝖔𝖗 and Balasar approached, each placing his right hand on the tablet. The same time, 𝕊𝖃alla raised the living flame to the sky. Then a gust of wind descended over the square and the flame trembled, but did not go out. The crowd whispered. The gods received the covenant. After the ceremony, long tables were set in the wide courtyard of the palace, not of celebration, but of reconciliation. The wounded soldiers of both cities ate together. Larsa.Not and Siritu, now heroes of Larsa, stood beside the old captains of Uruk. 𝕭𝖃, his wound still unhealed, held close to 𝕊𝖃alla, though his heart was still restless, for he knew that evil had been defeated, but not completely destroyed. That evening, when all in the city slept, a dream came to 𝕿𝖃𝖃. Again he saw a green and peaceful field, but in its center, a black, smooth, shadowless stone. On it was a writing he knew, but which erased itself whenever he tried to read it. When he woke up, 𝕿𝖃𝖃 said only this: I have won a battle, but the curse of Ashazur is not yet broken. Another part of him lies in silence. But that day, in Larsa, no one spoke of the shadow, only of the flame, and of the covenant of light. Chapter 35. The Wedding of Light and Covenant. 40 days after the end of the war, the city-states of Uruk and Larsa were filled with a rare joy, the likes of which had not been seen for a generation. Peace had been won with blood, but now the hearts of men beat in unison. Under the blessing of the gods, 2 royal weddings would bind not only souls, but also cities and the heart of Uruk. The palace of limestone walls and bronze towers had prepared for the wedding with a splendor reminiscent of the solar festivals dedicated to Utu. The halls were adorned with garlands of palm flowers, polished copper rings, and carpets woven with sacred signs. 𝕊𝖃alla, the priestess and daughter of the high priest 𝕿𝖃𝖃, wore a white linen robe, sewn with gold thread and studded with river pearls. On her forehead was the diadem of light, an ancient piece preserved from the times of Queen 𝕊𝖃. 𝕭𝖃, the warrior who had become the symbol of courage, was dressed in a tunic of fine wool dyed royal blue, with a short lion skin cloak, a sign of the honor won in battle. The ritual had been led by 𝕿𝖃𝖃, the high priest, in the temple in the palace garden. It was a sacred ritual of the unification of hearts, inspired by the tradition of the worship of Inanna and Dumuzi. In front of the altar, 𝕊𝖃alla and 𝕭𝖃 were symbolically tied with a red woolen cord, wrapped 3 times around their joined hands. Then they drank from the cup of life, from which it is said that he also drinks the king on the day of the coronation. The words spoken by 𝕿𝖃𝖃 were, as the waters of the Euphrates embrace its banks, so may your union be. Like bread shared and salt preserved, may you lack neither blessing nor patience. Each guest received a small oil lamp, which he lit at sunset, filling the palace with warm light, the symbol of the new path open for the people and for the gods. People of Uruk and sister cities, today our light rises not by the raised sword, but by the joined hands. 𝕊𝖃alla, the daughter of the temple, and 𝕭𝖆𝖙, the son of courage, show us that power lies not only in strength, but in the love that unites. We swear that Uruk will be a place of peace and wisdom. On the same day, but further west at Larsa, in the jade palace illuminated by copper mirrors, an equally long-awaited wedding took place. 𝕭𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖑𝖊, the son of a family of soldiers and a scholar of the tablets, and Siritu, the girl of fire and sword, who had won her fame in battle and in saving 𝕊𝖃alla. Siritu wore a red dress with gold embroidery and a long scarf fastened with a jade brooch. 𝕭𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖑𝖊 was dressed in the robe of civil ceremonies, with astrological symbols and cuneiform writing inscribed with protective formulas. Their ritual was officiated in the Temple of Utu by Siritu, the scribe priest. They circled the solar altar 7 times, holding in their hands a vessel of water and a lighted lamp, a sign of the balance between heart and mind. After spinning, they were asked to sit on the seat of double life, an ancient stone bench where sacred marriages were sealed. Then, Siritu's word was, fire and knowledge, sword and thought. You found yourselves in the shadow of war and recognized yourselves in the silence of souls, be one, like the root and the top of the sacred tree. Today, heaven did not ask for sacrifices, but song. See what sprouts from pain, love. Siritu and 𝕭𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖑𝖊 are not just bride and groom, but the sign that Larsa can love again. Let us remember our roots and look at the future with their eyes, clear, united, fearless. In both cities, the temple bells were rung at the same time. Cloth kites in the shape of doves were raised, and on each one was written a name of those lost in battle. To fly to the sky, and the evening, the celebration spread to the squares of the cities, with circle dances, with storytellers, with children running carrying burning torches, and with old men who cried and smiled at the same time. 𝕊𝖃alla and 𝕭𝖆𝖃, Siritu and 𝕭𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖑𝖊. 2 pairs, 2 oaths, 2 cities bound forever. Chapter 36. Soldiers under the hot stars. After the feast and the light, a silent, deep gratitude remained in the hearts of the 2 cities. It was not only the kings, not only the priests and the heroes who had faced evil. Under the walls, in the valleys, on the hills, in the flames and mud of battles, the soldiers of Uruk and Larsa had been the ones who had stood up to the shadow. The army of Uruk was famous for its strict order and silence on the march, but also for something unusual. The soldiers wore breastplates reinforced with strips of burnt oak and copper, resistant to rapid cutting. Their commander, 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖑𝖊, was a man of iron will and heavy silence, who during the siege of Larsa held the eastern line for 2 days without reinforcements. The soldiers of Uruk fought in formations. They were trained to fight side by side, with broad shields painted with the eye of the god, and they were taught to fight side by side, not to break ranks even when the shadows pulled them to their death's point. One of them, the soldier 𝕿𝖊𝖒𝖕𝖕, had lost an arm in a fight with a creature of the Salt Hill, but he fought on with his sword tied to his other hand and saved the life of a fallen priest. His name was engraved on the southern gate of Uruk. Larsa was famous for its light archers and swift spearmen, who wore short red cloaks and turbans of white cloth, dyed at dawn with pomegranate pigment. Under the command of the brave Ashera, leader of the city guard, the soldiers of Larsa were the first to clash with the hordes of Ashazur. They wore no heavy mail, but breastplates of double leather and sandals with bronze spikes, which allowed them to run on the rocks and roofs. They were fast, flexible, lethal. A female soldier, 𝕊𝖃𝖐𝖕, shot the last arrow into the head of a giant shadow just as it was about to break down the gate of Utu's temple. Since then, a fresco has been painted in the temple with her face and an inscription, "She who shot between 2 breaths of death." On the night when Ashazur sent the shadows to sink Larsa, the soldiers did not flee, although the air was poisoned and the voices of the dead called to them. The chronicles speak of 6 centurions who remained within the walls to protect the retreat of the civilians. Soldier named 𝕐𝑺, the same one who had announced the presence of the robbers at the beginning of the journey, remained alone on a hill, shooting his bow until the fire consumed him. His body has not been found, but the place where he stood is now called 𝕐𝑺 Hill, and there a fire is lit their torch at each solstice. After the final battle, on the field near Larsa, the surviving soldiers of both armies gathered without command, formed a circle, and offered each other their war belts in a sign of brotherhood. 𝕊𝖃alla, clad in her white cloak, and Siritu, the high priest, blessed them all with holy water and a splash of wine, saying, "You, those of brave blood, have been shield and banner. Let no name be forgotten from your lips, nor death from your hearts." These were the soldiers, men with open chests before the shadow, with hands that trembled only when they caressed a rescued child. They were the foundation on which the new alliance was built. They were the army of the East, those who fought not just for cities, but for a future. Chapter 37. Black Winds from 𝕿𝖙𝖕𝖒. The sun was sinking heavily over the bare, jagged slopes of the 𝕿𝖙𝖕𝖒 valley, where the earth was cracked with age, and the air trembled like an unseen breath. Far from the eyes of the cities, at the edge of that valley, in an old fort of burnt stone, a new camp had formed, the Eastern Hawks. They were no longer a handful of robbers or shadowy men. Now, they had reorganized, with gold, with weapons, with well-trained mercenaries. The famous robber was called 𝕊𝖕𝖒, nicknamed Steel Jaw because he had lost part of his jaw in a battle and replaced it with a black bronze prosthesis. He was tall, his eyes hidden under a red hood, and with a scar running down his neck. A former soldier in the army, a warrior of Akkad, 𝕊𝖕𝖒 knew the tactics of war and had the gift of sharp words. To his side was a woman known in Uruk as 𝕭𝖃𝖃, the one with the light hand. She had once been an art thief and spy in the royal palace, but had been caught and banished from the city after stealing a sacred tablet from the Temple of Inanna. She had lived in exile for years, and now she had returned, not as a fugitive, but as a shadow general. 𝕭𝖃𝖃 wore a thin gazelle-skin cloak with hidden chains, and her black hair was tied with silver rings. Under her command were 50 elite horsemen, most of them former officers paid with precious stones, Sumerian silver, and promises of revenge. The tents of the falcons were set on the terraces of a steep cliff, and the path leading to them was guarded by archers from the edge of Elam. Bluish flames burned in the large clay bowls, and between the tents walked people from 10 nations, Gauls from the steppes, spearmen from Zubshali, fugitives from the north. The mercenaries did not fight for curses or gods, but for gold. Each wore a short tunic of dyed wool, hard leather breastplates, and swords with ivory handles, brought by 𝕭𝖃𝖃 from across the seas. Some had horses with light chains, and others carried black banners, without a symbol, only a red feather as a sign of death. In a large tent, draped in dark velvet, 𝕊𝖕𝖒 threw a handful of stones at a clay map. The Larsa are wounded, the Uruks are returning to their wine. Tea is our time. We will go through the dry pass to the southeast. We will bypass the hills of death and hit their caravans. We will choke their supplies. In a month, they will be hungry. 𝕭𝖃𝖃 laughed short, coldly. And Nikalla, and Sumer, they are loved by the people. That is a sword in the side. Then we will break it. We will defeat them not only with swords. Send men to the cities. Spread rumors. Fear is our silent weapon. On a watchtower, an old rider named 𝕚𝖙n, the oldest of the mercenaries, stuck his spear into the ground and looked north, where the sky was clear. It is not good what is coming, 𝕊𝖕𝖒. The river in the 𝕿𝖙𝖕𝖒 valley has not died, it has only closed for a while. You carry its flame again, but no one listened to the elders. Under the black canvas of the camp, the new army was gathering, and a new banner, red with the silhouette of a falcon in flight, was raised. It was the beginning of a new threat. This time not from the world of shadows, but from flesh, blood, and a thirst for power.